Hey everyone, welcome to Paranormal M. I hope you're doing well tonight. In this video, we have a few paranormal stories to listen to, starting with a strange experience from the summer of 2000. If you enjoy the video, please give it a like, and if you have a story of your own, you can send it to me. This first one begins with the narrator upstairs in his room, playing Diablo 2, when he notices a woman walking down the stairs like she belongs there. But a moment later, she's gone. Settle in, relax, and sleep well tonight. I still remember this like it happened last week. It was the summer of 2001, and I was upstairs in my bedroom playing Diablo 2 on the family computer. Back then, I didn't have some fancy gaming chair. It was just a regular old office chair, the kind that squeaked if you leaned too far back. While I was waiting for the game to load, I kept rocking in that chair, leaning back and letting it creak a little. And when I rocked back one time, I saw a woman walking down the stairs. My room was positioned in a way where I had a clear view of the top of the staircase. I could see her standing there for a second, looking down like she was about to descend. And then I watched her go down step by step between the bars of the banister. She looked completely normal. She wasn't glowing, she wasn't see-through, she didn't float. The room didn't turn cold. Nothing dramatic happened. She was dressed like a typical suburban mom from the 80s or 90s. Nothing flashy. Maybe a sweatshirt, maybe mom jeans or sweatpants. Just modest, everyday clothes. And I could hear her footsteps on the stairs. That's probably why I didn't panic right away. People stopped by our house now and then. Friends of my mom's, church people, PTA parents, neighbors dropping things off. It wasn't unusual for someone to be there. Our house only had one bathroom, and it was at the bottom of the stairs. Some houses in our neighborhood had the bathroom upstairs, but ours was downstairs, close to the staircase. So I just assumed this woman was someone my mom knew, and maybe she was looking for the bathroom. I stood up from my chair, leaned over the railing, and called out, "Ma'am, the bathroom is right." But nobody was there. I went downstairs. The bathroom door was open. Nobody was inside. I looked toward the living room and could see the front door. It was closed and locked with the deadbolt. Then I went toward the back of the house. That door was closed too, though it wasn't locked. Outside, my mom was on the deck moving patio furniture around because we were supposed to have people over in a few days. I asked her, "Did your friend find the bathroom?" She looked at me and said, "What friend?" "We're the only ones here." So I told her what I saw. The two of us searched the house together. Every room, every corner, everywhere someone could have gone. We didn't find anyone. And then, just like that, the moment passed. My mom asked me to help her outside with the yard, and we never really talked about it again. I was in my late teens at the time, so part of me wonders if she thought I had just scared myself playing a creepy game alone upstairs. Or maybe she'd had some kind of strange experience in that house too, and she simply didn't want to discuss it. I honestly don't know. Years later, I told that story at a college party when everyone was swapping ghost stories. Some people laughed it off. Some were interested. Some just enjoyed the weirdness of it. But one girl, named Kara, got really quiet. She seemed more disturbed than anyone else. I tried to reassure her. I told her I never felt threatened. I never saw that woman again. Nothing else happened in that house before or after. And then Kara said something I've never forgotten. She said, "I really hope it was a ghost." Then she told us about an older man in her family, maybe her grandfather or great-uncle, who had started mentally slipping when she was younger. He would wander away from home and walk into other people's houses without realizing what he was doing. Sometimes they were houses he used to know. Sometimes they belonged to old friends or relatives. Sometimes they were just random homes. People would find him sitting at a kitchen table, reading a book, organizing a pantry, or tinkering with things in a garage like he belonged there. The homeowners would panic, call the police, and eventually someone from his family would come get him. But one time, a woman found him hiding in a closet. She thought he had broken in and was waiting there to hurt her after she went to sleep. But he said he thought the house was being robbed and that he was hiding from the burglar. In his mind, he was a child again, hiding in the house he grew up in. That's when the whole situation became much more serious. And after Kara told that story, my own experience felt different. Because a ghost is scary, sure. It's strange and unsettling. But the idea that some real woman might have been walking through my house, maybe noticing my mom was outside and distracted, and then slipping away quietly when she heard my game or the squeak of my chair upstairs. That possibility bothers me a lot more. I still remember the week we moved into that old rental house in Ottawa. The kids were tiny then, so my parents kept them for a few days while my husband and I tried to clean the place, unpack boxes, and make it feel like home. At first, nothing seemed especially strange. The house was a little worn down, sure, but not unusual. Except for the kitchen. Every time I went in there, I felt this awful heaviness. Not just discomfort, but dread. Like the air had gone thick around me. I kept brushing it off because we had too much to do, and honestly, I didn't want to scare myself before we'd even finished unpacking. While I was sorting through clothes in the bedroom, I found this ridiculous navy coverall my husband had gotten years earlier as a joke gift. I didn't know what else to do with it, so I tossed it up onto the top shelf at the back of the closet. It fell right back down. I thought I'd thrown it badly, so I picked it up and tossed it again. It came back out. At that point, I rolled it tightly into a ball and shoved it as far back as I could. Then I walked down the hall to tell my husband, who was in the kitchen, that apparently the house was already rejecting our belongings. When I came back into the bedroom, I stopped cold. That coverall was lying flat across the bed, fully spread out, sleeves straight, legs straight, like someone had carefully arranged it there. The bed was several feet away from the closet. I can still remember the way my stomach dropped. Every hair on my body stood up. I felt sick. My husband tried to talk me down and said maybe I'd put it there without realizing, or maybe it had somehow fallen and opened up on the bed. I wanted to believe that, so I did. I went back to work, unpacking bathroom boxes and fixing the messy caulking around the tub. By the time I finished, I was exhausted. My husband and I sat down in the living room for a break. The moment I sat on the couch, the cushion under me shifted. Not a little settling movement. It felt like something moved beneath me. I jumped up, and my husband told me gently that I was probably tired, and maybe the smell from the caulk was getting to me. That made enough sense, so I tried to laugh it off and sat down again. This time, something jabbed me hard from underneath. It felt exactly like a hand pushing up into me. I yelped and shot off the couch. We actually started wondering if a mouse or rat had somehow gotten in during the move. We left the house, bought traps, checked everywhere, and found nothing. 2 days later, we brought the kids home. That was when things got worse. Our 5-year-old son suddenly couldn't sleep. He kept telling us that every time he closed his eyes, he saw fire. Not a small fire. He said it was everywhere. Endless flames. And there was a man standing inside them. That scared me more than I wanted to admit, but we tried to keep life normal. Then my husband and I started experiencing something strange too. When we were falling asleep, or just waking up, we'd see these horrible flashes in our minds. Violent images. Death. Pain. Things neither of us had ever experienced before. It always happened in that strange in-between place, right before sleep or right after waking. It got to the point where I dreaded closing my eyes. But the worst night was with our daughter. She was 2, and I woke up to her crying in a way I knew wasn't normal. It wasn't a fussy cry or a tired cry. It was the kind of cry that means something is very wrong. I ran into her room. Above her crib, near the little paper bird mobile, there was a dark shape blocking the glow from the nightlight. It wasn't just a shadow in the corner. It was hanging there, dense and still, like a patch of darkness had gathered itself over her bed. I grabbed my daughter out of the crib immediately. The mobile was usually turning slightly because the room always had a faint draft. But that night, it was perfectly still. I blew a strong breath toward it, expecting the paper birds to move. They didn't. The shadow didn't move either. It was like my breath hit a wall. I was terrified, but more than that, I was furious. Whatever was happening, it was bothering my children, and something in me just snapped. I stood there holding my daughter and said, very firmly, "No, that's enough." Then I took her back to our room and put her in our bed. After that, I went and got my son, too. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. My husband didn't see the shadow himself, but he saw me afterward, and I think that frightened him almost as much. Oddly, things calmed down after we adopted a rescue cat. The strange incidents became less frequent, almost like the house pulled back a little, but that heavy feeling in the kitchen never really went away. We left when the lease ended. And the strangest part is this: neither my husband nor I have experienced anything like that before or since. I worked for the DWP for about 7 years, quite a while back now, and one of the buildings I was based in was Dutch's house in Birmingham. I honestly couldn't tell you if it's still standing these days, but I remember that place very clearly. While I was there, I got quite friendly with some of the security staff. One of them, a lovely bloke called Les, used to tell me all sorts of stories about the building. He's no longer with us now, bless him. But some of the things he told me have stayed with me ever since. Because it was a government building, it didn't just shut up at 5 o'clock. There were people working late, sometimes until 10 at night, and once the last person had left, security had to do a full sweep of the place. They'd check every floor, lock the main doors, and then go through the car park before finally closing everything down properly. One night, Les and another guard, I think his name was Stan, had gone through the whole building. Every floor had been checked, every office was empty, and they were certain there wasn't a soul left inside. They were walking through the car park with their torches, with a bit of light coming in from the street lamps, when they suddenly heard banging from somewhere above them. They looked up at the building, and there, on one of the upper floors, was a woman. Not a shadow, not a reflection. A woman, plain as anything, standing at the window and knocking on the glass. Both of them saw her. Straight away they thought, how on earth did we miss her? They assumed she must have been in the toilets or tucked away somewhere when they checked that floor. So they went back inside. Les stayed down at the front desk, and Stan went up to the floor where they'd seen her. He unlocked the doors and started checking around. About half an hour later, he came back down to reception on his own, looking completely confused. He said he'd checked that floor and the floors above and below it, and there was nobody there. No woman, no staff member, nothing. Then he asked Les, "Has anyone come through the front entrance?" Les told him no. Nobody had come out. Nobody had passed the desk. They ended up having to ring the site manager, who was not happy at all. Apparently, he accused them of drinking on the job, which they absolutely hadn't been. But they both knew what they'd seen. And that wasn't the only strange thing that happened there. Another time, two security lads were sent to fit a new CCTV camera in one of the alleyways beside the building. They took a ladder, the camera, a drill, and all the bits they needed. The guards at the main desk could see them on another camera further up the alley, so they were watching them while they worked. Now the strange thing was, these two were taking ages to get the camera fitted. Every now and then, they'd stop what they were doing and look behind them, as if someone was standing there talking to them. Eventually, they came back to the main desk, and the guards there started teasing them. You know, saying things like, "How many security guards does it take to put up one camera?" But the two who'd been outside didn't laugh. They got annoyed and said, "We would have had it done in 10 minutes if it wasn't for that kid asking us question after question." The guards at the desk just looked at them. What kid? They said there'd been a little boy in the alley with them, asking what they were doing, why they were putting that thing on the wall, and all sorts of curious little questions. The two guards at the front desk went quiet, then told them they'd been watching the alley on CCTV the whole time. There had been no child there. Not once. They showed them the footage, and sure enough, the two men were standing there, turning around and talking to empty space. One of those camera fitters quit that same day. The other one later said the boy had looked old-fashioned, wearing a little flat cap, a shirt, and shorts, almost like something out of another time. And honestly, after hearing stories like that, I never looked at that building the same way again. I'd been offered a place for a small business, and the rent was honestly too good to ignore. The catch was the upstairs area. It was in rough shape and needed a lot of work. The building itself was an old bank, built sometime between the First and Second World Wars. Upstairs had originally been a small apartment for the bank manager and his family. For its time, I imagine it would have been pretty lovely. By the time I got there, though, it was tired, dusty, and badly in need of being brought back to life. Downstairs was a wellness salon, so I couldn't do any noisy renovation during the day. That meant I'd finish my regular job, head over there in the evening, and work from around 7 at night until midnight. I was so determined to get it finished that I didn't really think about how eerie the place was. I was sourcing old timber, copying the original skirting boards and trim, trying to make everything look like it belonged to the building again. I was completely absorbed in it. There was a hallway outside the rooms upstairs, and the floorboards had this very distinct squeak when someone walked past. It was the kind of sound you recognize immediately. One night, while I was working, I heard that squeak. At first, I barely reacted. Then I stopped and realized what time it was. It was late, and I was supposed to be alone. Then it hit me that I'd heard that same squeak a few times before on other nights, but I'd been too focused to really register it. So I went out into the hall and looked around. There was nobody there. My first thought wasn't ghosts or anything like that. It was a real person, someone hiding in the building. So I grabbed a hammer, went downstairs, checked the doors and windows, and made sure everything was locked. Most of the downstairs area was alarmed anyway, and everything seemed fine. I went back upstairs and kept working. A little while later, the hallway floor squeaked again. This time I went out quickly, and just after that I heard a dull little click or clank from the old bathroom at the end of the hall. Without thinking too much, I walked straight down there to see who was inside. It was a big old bathroom with a pale green porcelain bathtub and matching sink. Very dated, very still. There was no one in there, and there was no other way in or out. I wouldn't say I was terrified in the moment, but I'd had enough for the night. I tidied up quickly, packed my things, and left. After that, the noises kept happening now and then. Nothing dramatic, just random sounds. The hall squeaking. The occasional strange noise from another room. A couple of times the lights flickered. Looking back, I also remember tools turning up in odd places, almost like someone had hidden them somewhere silly just to annoy me. At the time, I brushed most of it off. I just wanted the renovation done. When I finally finished, the upstairs looked really good. I was proud of it. I invited some of the staff from downstairs to come up and have a look. They were hairdressers, massage therapists, beauty therapists, that sort of thing. All women. A couple of them mentioned they hadn't been upstairs in years. Then one of them said something like, "The energy doesn't feel as bad up here now." That stuck with me. Later that week, I was downstairs and asked one of the staff what she meant by that. That's when she told me more about the place. Apparently, when the hair studio used to be upstairs, all sorts of things had happened after hours. People felt invisible hands touch them. Trolleys moved on their own. Voices came from the corners of empty rooms. None of the staff liked being up there, especially alone. And that was the part that made everything feel different. Because when I'd been working there late at night, I hadn't known any of that. I hadn't known the building had that kind of reputation. I honestly think if someone had told me beforehand, I would have been out of there the first time I heard that hallway squeak. I ended up using that premises for 3 years. Over that time, other people mentioned feeling uneasy in certain parts of the building. A friend of mine, Callum, said he was sure he saw something in the hallway once. He wasn't the type to exaggerate either. He said it quietly, like he didn't even really want to believe it himself. In the last few months I was there, the downstairs salon moved out, so I had the whole building to myself. I never saw anything clearly, but there were a few nights when I'd get this sudden feeling that I wasn't alone, and that it was probably time to leave. So I did. I learned to trust that feeling. There was one more strange thing that happened after all of this. I had a chance encounter with a woman who claimed to have psychic ability. I hadn't told her about the building in any detail, but she described it to me exactly. Not just generally either. She mentioned details only I would have known because of the renovation work I'd done there. She told me the place was very active. According to her, there were 2 spirits around while I was working. One was female, and she was apparently very interested in me. She followed me around and tried to get my attention by playing little tricks. Moving tools, making sounds, that kind of thing. The other was male. She said he wasn't as interested, but he would check in from time to time. I don't know what to make of all that, but I do know she described the place far too accurately for comfort. And here's the last odd part. I left that building more than 5 years ago, and since then it's stayed vacant, even though it's in a valuable rental location. That never made much sense to me. The truth is, the place never felt quite right from the start. I only took it because the rent was cheap. At the time, I thought I was just renovating an old bank apartment after hours. Looking back, I think something was there with me most nights. And I'm very glad I didn't know that while I was holding a hammer in an empty hallway at midnight. I still think about this sometimes, and honestly, it still gives me that strange little chill. This was about 23 years ago, back when my mother and I both smoked cigarettes. We never smoked inside the house, especially with the kids there, so after everyone was tucked in for the night, we had this little ritual. We called it our goodnight cigarette. We would sit out on the front porch in the dark, talking quietly and letting the day fade out. We almost never turned the porch light on because we lived in the South, and once that light came on, every bug in 3 counties showed up like it had been personally invited. Our house sat at the very end of a dead-end road with a huge open field beside it. One night, while we were sitting there, we saw 3 women walking along the edge of that field. They were dressed in old-fashioned antebellum dresses. One of them was carrying a basket. They didn't look transparent exactly. They looked solid enough that, for a second, my mind tried to make them real. But somehow, at the same time, We both knew they weren't. They walked straight into the field like they belonged there. The funny part is, my mother and I just froze. We were sitting there with cigarettes in our hands, not even smoking them anymore, just holding them like two porch statues. Then my mother finally said, very quietly, "Did you see that?" And I said, "Yes." We were both pretty shaken, but also completely fascinated. Years later, we got what felt like our first little piece of validation. A new neighbor moved in, a retired Marine officer who had come back to town to help care for his mother. While we were talking with him, he mentioned that when he was a boy, that field hadn't always been just a field. He said the entrance to it used to lead to an old plantation house. That stopped me cold. Then, even later, one of my daughters was grown and working as a hairstylist. A client of hers, who just happened to live in our neighborhood, told her that she and a friend had seen women in antebellum dresses walking through their backyard. My daughter immediately said, "My mom and grandma saw them too." I can't explain how relieved we all felt. Not because it made it less strange, but because it made us feel less alone in what we had seen. There was another time, when my youngest was only about 2. She used to come with me in the mornings when I took the older kids to school. One cold morning, there was frost on the ground, and she was standing near the back field, giggling and waving at something. I told her to come on, but she just kept waving. Then she said, "Mama, look, they don't have shirts on." I ran over and looked, but I didn't see anything at all. When we got back home, I asked her what they had been doing. Since she was only 2, it took a while to get the whole story out of her, but she said there were people standing around a fire. She said there was a dog there too. One of them noticed her and pointed, and then they all turned and smiled and waved back at her. She said they had long hair, and one man was sitting on a log with long white hair. She wasn't scared at all. From the way she described it, they felt friendly to her. Then she mentioned something that really stayed with me. She said they had feathers pointing down along the side of their faces. Now, I'm no expert, but my oldest daughter's father is Native American, and his family lived on a reservation, so I had heard a little here and there. But I had never heard of that specific kind of headdress. So of course, I went looking. And wouldn't you know it, the tribe connected to that area had the name of a neighboring town. And in the images I found, they wore feathers pointing downward along the side of the face. That one still sits with me. The last thing is something we all believe is residual. It doesn't feel like a person or a spirit trying to interact. It's more like a shadow or an echo. It looks like a very large bear. He comes out of one wall in the living room, crosses the room, and disappears into the next wall, just minding his own business. He's never threatening, never even interested in us. He just strolls through. It happens maybe 2 or 3 times a year, and it has been going on for more than 25 years. The kids used to call him Big Brother Bear because of the movie. And the strangest part is, when he appears, everyone can see him. Even people who don't believe in any of this. He just walks through the room like he has somewhere else to be. And honestly, at this point, he feels like part of the house. I was 15 when I ran away from home, and later that same year, I ended up in a group home for runaway girls. Most of us were teenagers, somewhere between 13 and 17. Every now and then, younger kids would stay with us for a short time, maybe a week or 2, depending on their situation. When this happened, there were 4 of us girls there, me, another girl who was 16, and 2 girls who were 17. There were also 2 adult staff members on duty. Then one day, they brought in a little girl. She was only 11. She'd been removed from her family, and I'll call her Susie. She was quiet, sweet, really. The kind of kid who didn't take up much space, and because she was so young, all of us felt protective of her in our own rough teenage way. So whenever we did something, we tried to include her. She'd been there about a week when, one night, we were all bored and decided to mess around with a Ouija board. At first, it was silly, just teenage nonsense. Questions like, does so-and-so have a crush on this person? Or, is my dead grandmother here? And then somebody would say, okay, prove it. Say something only she would know. Then one of us asked if there were any spirits or ghosts in the room. The board said yes. So we asked who the spirit wanted to talk to. It spelled out the first couple letters of Susie's name, and then it stopped. We tried asking more questions, but after that, it didn't feel like anything was moving anymore, so we quit using the board. Then one of the girls told Susie to lie down on the floor so we could try something else. Susie did it. She laid flat on her back, and we turned off the lights, lit a candle, and started chanting. Light as a feather, stiff as a board. Nothing happened. Then another girl said something like, Spirit, come through this candle and speak to us. And I swear, the candle flickered. Right after that, Susie got this strange look on her face and said, very softly, no. That was the first moment I felt something in my stomach twist. I remember thinking, maybe we should stop. But the older girls were kind of leading everything, and I didn't want to be the one to ruin it, so I stayed quiet. Then someone asked, Spirit, what do you want to tell us? A couple of the girls giggled, and then Susie said, in this flat, empty voice, don't let the dead in. The whole room changed. I know that sounds dramatic, but it really did. The joking stopped. The air felt heavier. Someone laughed in that nervous way people do when they're scared but don't want to admit it. One of the 17-year-olds finally said, okay, this is stupid, and blew the candle out. And that's when it started. Susie began trembling, then shaking, then violently shaking. At first we thought she was messing around. We were saying things like, come on, very funny, get up. But her eyes were wide open, staring straight ahead, and she wasn't responding to us. Then she started flailing her arms. All four of us crowded around her, trying to keep her still, but we couldn't. She was twisting, kicking, jerking, and moving with this strength that did not make sense for an 11-year-old girl. Someone yelled for help, and the two staff members came running in. They asked what was going on, and we told them the truth. We had been playing with a Ouija board, and then she just started shaking. The staff called her name, loudly. They grabbed her arms and asked if she was okay. Nothing. Then they started yelling at her, telling her to knock it off or she'd be in trouble. Still nothing. And then she got worse. She shook harder. 6 of us were trying to hold her down, 4 teenage girls and 2 grown adults. And we could not do it. She threw some of us off like it was nothing. Then she got up onto all fours, still shaking, making this horrible guttural sound. She was knocking things over, swinging her arms, kicking out. We kept trying to grab her, but she kept breaking free. She was 11, just 11 years old. Finally, one of the girls was almost crying and shouted, "Tell us how to help you. Please, how do we help you?" And Susie answered. Her voice sounded exhausted, strained, almost strangled. She said, "You have to take the candle, light it, tell the spirit to leave, wish it well, and then blow it out." I still remember the way she emphasized certain words. Take, light, tell, wish. Then, she was still shaking while she said it. People were still trying to hold her down. So someone grabbed the candle, lit it, and said something like, "Spirit, leave this child. We wish you well." Then they blew it out, and Susie just collapsed. She dropped onto the floor, drenched in cold sweat. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. We just stood there stunned. Then one of the staff members said, very quietly, "Everyone go to your rooms. Go to bed. Susie, come with me." I don't remember much after that. What I do remember is the way the staff acted for the next couple of days. They were usually upbeat with us, even when things were messy. Even when someone got bad news, or there was a fight, or somebody was crying, they tried to keep the mood steady. But after that night, they were different. Subdued, careful, almost scared. And that, more than anything, told me that something had shaken them too. I know people can explain a lot of this away. Fear, hysteria, kids getting carried away, all of that. I understand that. But I still cannot explain her strength. Susie was a normal-sized 11-year-old girl. She wasn't big. She wasn't aggressive. She wasn't the kind of kid who would pull a prank or try to scare everyone. She was quiet and mild and sweet. And 6 people, including 2 adults, could not hold her down. I still think about that night sometimes. And every time I do, it creeps right back under my skin. I want to tell you about a few experiences that have stayed with me because they never really felt random. About a year after my grandfather passed away, we moved my grandmother out of the house they had shared for so long and into a smaller place. That old house had been the center of everything for our family. Birthdays, holidays, Sunday dinners, all of it lived there, in the walls. One night, I woke up out of nowhere. My eyes just snapped open. The room was dark and quiet, and when I looked to my right, my grandfather was standing there. It scared me, of course. How could it not? But at the same time, I didn't want to blink. I had this feeling that if I closed my eyes, even for a second, he would disappear. So I just stared at him for as long as I could. I wasn't planning to tell anyone. I figured people would think I had dreamed it or imagined it. But the next morning, I was in the kitchen making coffee when my mom came downstairs. We were having a normal morning conversation, nothing unusual, and then she suddenly said, "I think my dad came to see me last night." That stopped me cold. To me, that felt like confirmation. I really believed my grandfather was coming to say goodbye, especially because we weren't going to be going back to that old family house anymore. I've only seen him one other time since then, and that was almost 10 years ago. My grandmother passed this year, and part of me feels like maybe I won't see him again. But honestly, who knows? Another time, I went on a trip with some friends to a cabin none of us had ever stayed in before. It belonged to a family friend of one of my friends. The cabin itself seemed peaceful enough. Nothing felt especially creepy, other than the usual, "we're deep in the woods in Michigan" kind of feeling. We had a good day, hung out, laughed, ate, and eventually went to bed. Then, once again, I woke up in the middle of the night. But this time, it was different. It felt like I was sitting on top of the tall dresser across from the bed, looking down at myself sleeping. My friend was asleep on the top bunk above me. To my left, there was this darkness. Not just a shadow, but a deep, heavy blackness. Slowly, it started forming into what I would now call the Shadow Man. I've heard other people describe the same thing since then. He was tall, completely blacked out, but I could make out a tall hat, broad shoulders, and then the shape just dropped straight down. It was awful. I kept telling myself, "Do not turn around." With my grandfather, I wanted to look. I wanted to see him. With this thing, I absolutely did not. The next morning, our friends were asking how everyone slept. The friend who shared my room said she slept fine. But then my other friend, Dawn, started talking about what happened in her room. Her room was down the hall, and the closet in her room shared a wall with another friend's room. That matters. Dawn said she had been reading with the side table lamp on, and everything felt normal at first. Then the corner of the room near the closet got extremely dark. She said it was pitch black and felt heavy, almost threatening. Then our third friend, Sibel, said she had been hearing knocking from the wall to her left, which was the same wall connected to Dawn's closet. It wasn't constant, but it happened enough that she barely slept. Dawn said that when the blackness in her room wouldn't go away, she pulled the covers over herself and said, "Whoever you are, you're not welcome here. Go away." Not long after that, it disappeared. That's when I told her what happened to me. I honestly think whatever was in her room left and came into mine. The next night, all of us slept together in the living room. Now I live in a 100-year-old house in Detroit, and this house has its own little cast of characters. There's an older man in the basement. I've seen him a few times. He gives off grumpy energy, not evil or dangerous, just very much like, "This is my space, and I don't want people in it." After I saw him a couple of times, I finally said out loud, "I'll respect you as long as you respect me." And honestly, we've been fine for about 5 years. I still hear him sometimes. I've heard a man's voice speaking down in the basement, and there have been times when I'm coming up the basement stairs and I hear 2 sets of footsteps, mine and someone else's. Almost a year after I moved in, my neighbor across the street told me that an older man named Mitchell had died in the basement. So there's that. There's also a little girl in the house. I've seen her twice. She has that restless kid energy. She moves things, hides things, and I've heard her running down the hallway. I think she likes my bedroom because I get the feeling she spends time in there. One night, I was lying in bed and heard a child singing. Then I felt something come up beside the bed. It touched my leg, and then a small hand wrapped around my ankle. I pulled my leg back so fast and said, "You are not allowed to touch me." She hasn't touched me since, but she still tests my patience with noises, missing objects, and little tricks around the house. The third presence feels different. I think it's residual. It's a woman who walks the same path through the living room, over and over, like she's caught in a loop. I think Mitchell was probably already part of the house before I got here. As for the little girl and the woman, I'm not sure. I collect antiques, so there's always the chance they were already here, or that I brought something home with me. My sister says I need to stop antiquing. I have not stopped. And honestly, I probably won't. I ended up with a haunted bed. And I know that sounds dramatic, but honestly, I got rid of it the morning after I brought it into the house. That was all the time I needed. One night, that was enough. There was something attached to it. I don't know what else to call it except an imp. Just this nasty little presence that felt wrong in every possible way. It didn't come into my room, thankfully. I had warded the threshold. But it would sit itself in the closest doorway, right there in the hall, and just watch me. All night. At the time, I had a little love seat in my room too. So after a while, I gave up on the bed and moved over there, thinking maybe I could at least get a little rest. But whatever this thing was, it didn't like that. I could feel the shift immediately. It turned itself somehow, just enough so it could still see me from the hallway. That was the part that really got under my skin. I knew it was stuck out there because I had warded the other doorways in the house too. It couldn't get in, but it didn't have to. It just stayed there, waiting and watching until the sun started coming up. Then it vanished. That next morning, I walked out and told my parents, "We need to get that bed out of here, today." Normally, they would have brushed me off, rolled their eyes, maybe told me I was being ridiculous. but they didn't. Their room was directly across from mine, and they told me they'd both felt uneasy all night, even with their door shut. Like someone was standing outside in the hallway, just waiting. I told them that's because something was. They didn't argue after that. The bed had come from a bedroom set I'd been given when I moved out of this massive old Victorian house where I'd been staying for a while. A girl I knew, Mara, had invited a few of us to live there temporarily. Her family owned the place and had been trying to sell it, but it had been empty for a long time. Winter was coming, so her mother thought it would be smart to have people inside the house to keep an eye on things, make sure the pipes didn't freeze, notice repairs, that kind of thing. What they forgot to mention was that the place was absolutely haunted from top to bottom. And I don't mean one creaky floorboard and a weird draft. I mean the whole house had layers. There was this black mist in the attic that would start drifting down through the ceiling whenever fewer than 3 people were in the house. You did not want to be there alone. Ever. There were cold spots that had nothing to do with the weather. Shadow figures moving where they shouldn't. Voices with no bodies attached to them. There was something in the basement that hated the dark and kept turning the light back on every time we shut it off. After about a week, we just gave up and left it on. There was an old woman in the front upstairs bedroom who liked to stand at the window and stare down at the driveway. There was something else in the crawl space behind the upstairs bathroom that none of us liked talking about. And then there was the little thing attached to my room, which had once been the nursery. I started calling it Harris, mostly because giving it a name made it feel slightly less awful. It liked to stay near my doorway unless the sun was up and the whole house was bright. On rainy days, gray days, dim days, it would show up again. There was also a spirit named Eliza in the house, and I always had the feeling she was working constantly to hold back the darker things. The mist, the shadows, whatever else was pressing in around the edges. So when I moved back home for a bit and took that bedroom set with me, I thought Harris was attached to the house, not the furniture. Turns out, that was a rookie mistake. I can only imagine how unsettling that must have been. Jarring is probably putting it gently. Part of me wonders whether they were trying to help you, in their own strange way, by getting you back to your bed as quickly as possible. But then there's the way they moved, so fast, almost like they were trying not to be seen. Like they knew their presence would frighten anyone who caught a proper look at them. I've had experiences of my own since I was around 12 or 13. One night I was sitting up in bed reading. It wasn't even very late. Then I saw the shape of a very tall man standing beside my wardrobe. Just a dark silhouette, completely still. I remember pulling the duvet right over my head and staying like that until I finally worked up the courage to peek out again. By then, he was gone. Years later, I started looking into the area where we lived and found out other people had seen similar things nearby. Our estate had been built over old coal mining seams, and the more I learned, the more it seemed connected. There was another day when my sister and I were playing, and we both heard a man laughing at us. Clear as anything. Not distant, not faint. Right there. But the strangest thing happened one night when we were playing hide and seek with Dad. It wasn't a large house, so there weren't many places to hide. From the stairs, we saw what looked like a man lying on his side under my cabin bed, propped up on one arm. It looked solid, real. We thought it was Dad, so we shouted that we'd found him. But the figure didn't move. I called out, "Dad?" And Dad answered from downstairs. He said he was watching telly because he was tired out. My sister and I ran straight down. When Dad went to check under the bed, there was nothing there. Whoever or whatever we had seen had vanished. There were other things too, smaller moments that stayed with me. Now I'm in my 40s, and the place I live in has its own atmosphere. I've seen shadow figures here several times. 3 of them looked completely solid and black, but only for a few seconds before disappearing the moment I turned to look properly. Sometimes I've even called out to them, telling them to come forward or speak if they want something. I felt my hair move when no one was near me. I felt the bed dip, like someone had sat down beside me. In the kitchen, I've seen empty bottles wobbling and settling back into place, as if they'd just been spun like coins. There have been sudden freezing patches of air, flickering lights, and orbs that honestly were beautiful in a strange way. But still, nothing quite like what you described. I did some digging into this house and the land around it, around the same time I was researching my childhood home. That's when I found out this place sits directly above an old double coal mining seam. It even explains the slight lean in the house and the subsidence. Then I discovered that 3 miners had died in a fire damp explosion in that very seam. After learning that, something shifted in me. A lot of what happens here seems tied to the mines. Knowing that has actually brought me some peace. Now, when something happens, I usually just greet them. It might be worth looking into what stood where your house is now. Local history archives, reference libraries, and local historians can be absolute treasure chests for that kind of thing. What happened to you sounds frightening, and I do think some spirits, or whatever they are, understand that their appearance scares us. Maybe that's why you were moved so quickly, so they could get you somewhere safe and disappear before you fully saw them. I'll tell you honestly, that is exactly what I've seen in this house. It's usually around the doorways. I'll catch something peering in just for a second, and then it disappears so quickly that I'm left wondering whether I really saw it at all. But I always get the same feeling from it. Not threatening, exactly. More like they're checking on me. At first, though, I was frightened. Properly frightened. There was one evening when I was lying in bed with my cat, and I saw one in the hallway. My cat definitely sees more than I do, by the way. She was already staring before I even looked. This thing was so dark that it covered the white frame of the door behind it. It stayed there for maybe 6 or 7 seconds, which doesn't sound long, but it felt much longer than usual. Most of them vanish almost instantly. I honestly think it thought I was asleep. Then it realized I wasn't, and it was just gone. My cat and I stayed tucked up in bed that night, like 2 nervous little hedgehogs. After that, I knew I had to start saying something. Whenever I saw something out of the corner of my eye, or felt that strange little shift in the room, I'd say, "I know you're here. Are you going to come and talk to me, or are you just going to keep hovering about?" They never answered. Not in words, anyway. But then I started doing some research into the area, and I found out about the old miners connected to the land here. 3 of them, in particular. Once I learned that, a lot of things began to make sense. I even found their names, and that changed how I felt. I was still cautious, but I wasn't terrified in the same way. So I started greeting them. I say goodnight before I go to sleep, and I tell them everything is all right. I tell them they can stand down now. They're still around. I know they are, but I haven't seen them like that for a long time. I still catch little movements in my peripheral vision, and when I do, I greet them. If I feel that sudden freezing air, I do the same. But they aren't the only ones here, and you'll have to stay with me on this, because this next part isn't about a ghost in the usual human sense. This one is something older, something tied to the earth and to the mining tunnels underneath. I have what people would now call a hob. Years ago, down in the mines, they were often called knockers. The old stories said they would knock inside the tunnels to warn miners if there was danger coming, like a collapse or a bad shift in the ground. Plenty of miners believed in them, and so did many of the widows who were left behind. When the mines closed and the seams flooded, houses were built over the land. Estates like this one. The belief was that some of the knockers moved into the homes and settled near the hearths and fireplaces. I know how that sounds. Believe me, I do. But the first families who lived around here, especially the old mining families, knew about it. Some would leave a little glass of milk out once a week, on the windowsill or by the hearth, and they'd say something like, "Your milk is there for you." So those smaller shadows I used to see, the ones I sometimes mistook for the cat, I believe that was him. I called him Ben. Every Friday, I leave a little milk for him on the windowsill, and I say, "Good health to you." He still has his habits. He stops the clocks in the sitting room sometimes, and now and again he'll do it in the kitchen too. He's even turned off my electric fan before. From what I understand, beings like him don't care for our human obsession with time. They don't live by it, and they never have. They belong to something older and slower, something rooted deep under our feet. And after I began to understand him, something lovely happened. My back garden became strangely healthy. Things started growing stronger than they had before. Then one day, I noticed a little plant coming up near the window, beside a bush. I didn't know what it was until it flowered. Bluebells. A small patch of them, right there by the house. So now I call him Bluebell Ben. I know there are things in this world that we'll never fully explain. Some are old, much older than us. Some people seem more likely to sense them than others, and maybe I'm one of those people. But I do believe that once you understand who or what might be sharing your space, it helps. It takes some of the fear away. At the same time, I think it's important to set boundaries. You can be respectful and still be firm. You can say what is not allowed. You can tell them when something frightens you or when you need peace. And in my experience, being calm, respectful, and clear makes all the difference. I moved into this little apartment on the 3rd floor, and when I say 3rd floor, I mean that was the end of the line. The stairs didn't go any higher. Each floor had 2 apartments, including mine, so I figured I had one neighbor right next door, and that was that. From inside my place, if I stood near the entryway, I could see the bottom of the stairs by the door next to mine. And pretty quickly after moving in, I started noticing that whoever lived there kept strange hours. Late at night, I'd hear movement. Sometimes it sounded like someone walking around. Other times, it was loud enough that I'd pause whatever I was doing and just listen. I kept running into the other people in the building, but never the person next door. Not once. Still, I told myself they probably worked nights or some kind of shift schedule. That explanation made enough sense, so I let it sit there. After I finally finished unpacking, I needed to put my moving boxes into storage. My rental came with a storage unit in the basement, so I asked a woman downstairs, Mara, where I was supposed to go. She looked a little confused and said, "Since you're on the 3rd floor, you can just use the attic. It's right up there with you. Much easier than dragging everything down." So I went back upstairs and started looking for a ceiling hatch. I checked the hallway, looked around near the stairwell, even stared at the ceiling like it might suddenly blink back at me. But there was nothing. Just my door and the door beside mine. Then I looked closer. My door had a mail slot, my name, and a doorbell. The other door had none of that. No nameplate, no bell, no mail slot. And the handle didn't even look like an apartment lock. It looked like an ordinary indoor door handle. That was the first moment my stomach sank. I stood there for a second, feeling ridiculous, then reached out and tried the handle. It opened. The door was heavier than it looked, old wood, and it made this dry, groaning sound as it swung inward. Behind it was not an apartment at all. There was a narrow set of dusty wooden stairs curving upward into the dark, and I realized those were the stairs I had been seeing from inside my apartment all along. It was daytime, and curiosity got the better of me, so I went up. At the top was this huge, unfinished attic. Big wooden beams, round windows like something from an old townhouse. Enough light coming in that I could see everything clearly. The space was enormous. At the far end, there were wooden frames where rooms might have been built someday. But there were no walls, no furniture, nothing. Just dust, beams, and silence. It could have been an incredible apartment if someone had renovated it. But no one lived there, which meant the neighbor I'd been hearing every night did not live there either. I went back down pretty fast and told a few friends. They all made jokes, of course. Everyone's brave when the haunted attic isn't above their own head. But the sounds kept happening. Evenings, late nights, footsteps, shifting, little crashes here and there. Then one night, I had friends over, and they heard it too. The moment they did, the jokes dried up. They grabbed flashlights and went upstairs, determined to solve it. They found exactly what I'd found, an empty attic. But they did notice something strange. My kitchen light was bleeding up through small cracks in my ceiling, cracks I had never noticed from below. In the dim attic, though, they were obvious. That meant the space above me was closer, thinner, more connected than I wanted it to be. After that, being alone there felt different. So I got a dog. I thought a puppy would calm me down, give me company, make the place feel less empty. And he did, in some ways. But he also made it harder to pretend nothing was happening. Whenever the noises started upstairs, he reacted. He'd race around the apartment, barking at the ceiling, ears up, completely locked onto whatever he heard. Sometimes I'd be watching TV and suddenly hear what sounded like someone running down those attic stairs. The attic door in the hall wouldn't open or close, but my dog would sprint to my front door, tail wagging, waiting to greet whoever he seemed absolutely sure was coming. That was somehow worse than fear. He was excited. Over time, the sounds got more frequent. At first it was only evenings. Then it was late nights. Then it was any hour it pleased. The final straw was New Year's. I had 3 people staying over, including my boyfriend. They all knew the stories. We had talked about the attic, laughed nervously, tried to explain things away. Eventually, we all went to sleep. Sometime during the night, I woke up to noises above the hallway. Then there was banging from the bathroom. It sounded like someone was trying to close the door, but couldn't quite manage it. At first I was annoyed, because I thought one of my friends was messing around. My dog jumped up, eager to investigate, so I opened my bedroom door. But instead of going toward the bathroom, he bolted into the living room where my friends were sleeping. That made me stop. I went to the bathroom anyway, and I saw the door moving by itself. It slowly opened, then slammed shut. I pushed it open and checked the window. Closed. No draft, nothing hanging on the handle, nothing behind the door. No explanation. I called the dog and hurried back to my room, completely shaken. My bedroom door had 2 panels of frosted glass, and in my rush to shut it, I woke my boyfriend. I got back into bed, but the dog stayed near the door, whining and scratching like he wanted out. I was trying to call him back when my boyfriend suddenly said, "What the hell is that?" Through the frosted glass, we saw a bright light moving down the dark hallway. Not flashing, not flickering, moving. Slowly, like someone was walking past the bedroom door carrying a lantern or a flashlight. We froze. Neither of us opened that door. After the light passed toward the living room, the noises faded. Nobody slept after that, except the dog, who apparently had made peace with the impossible. That night changed things. My boyfriend and I moved a few steps faster in our relationship because very soon after, I moved in with him. Two of my friends who were there still bring it up sometimes, trying to make it make sense. Maybe the bathroom door was a draft, they say, but we all know how that door moved. It slowly opened, then slammed shut with force. Not once, repeatedly. And the light? People have suggested a car passing outside. But car headlights don't reach a third-floor hallway through a kitchen window, around corners, through walls, and then move slowly past frosted bedroom glass like someone carrying them by hand. I still don't know what was in that place. I just know I'm glad I don't live under it anymore. I'm going through something very similar to what you're describing. My daughter is almost 4 now, but this started when she was about a year old. At first, it was little things. We would hear her through the baby monitor, just babbling away like she was having a full conversation with someone in the room. Then there were times I'd be changing her, and she'd look past my shoulder toward the doorway, completely focused on something. Of course, I'd turn around, and there would be nothing there. I remember looking back at her and quietly wondering, "Do you see someone?" Then, when she was around 2, we were playing in the living room together. Out of nowhere, she stopped, turned her head, and asked, "Where did Poppy go?" That hit me hard, because my dad passed away about 5 months before she was born. And the thing is, I didn't really talk about him. I didn't have pictures of him hanging around the house. Losing him had been really painful for me, so I kept a lot of that tucked away. But when she said that, it got my attention. A little while later, she said something about him leaving in an old car. That confused me because my dad mostly rode motorcycles and drove a pickup truck. So I thought, what is she talking about? But then she started describing these 2 older cars in surprising detail. Later, I asked my mother about it, and she confirmed that my parents had owned those exact cars before I was even born. They had sold them before I came along. There were no photos of them in our house. I had never heard stories about them, but my daughter was able to pick them out from a lineup of maybe 30 or 40 cars. The color, the make, the model, everything. It was honestly unsettling. After that, for several days, she would randomly point to a chair or a spot on the couch and say, "Poppy's there." And we'd look, and of course, there was nothing we could see. About a week later, we were at a hardware store. I was buying screws for a project, and I grabbed a cheaper box of drywall screws instead of the construction screws I actually needed. My daughter looked at me and said, "Those aren't the right screws." Same wording, same tone. Exactly the kind of thing my dad would have said. I looked at her and asked, "What did you just say?" She repeated it. So I asked, "How would you know that?" Without missing a beat, she said, "Poppy told me." I froze for a second, because at that point I was starting to feel genuinely shaken. So I said, "Well, if Poppy told you those are the wrong ones, did he tell you which ones are the right ones?" And again, without hesitation, she pointed to the correct box. So yes, I put the drywall screws back and bought the construction screws. And honestly, that was just the beginning. There have been other moments too. One time, she was at my mom's house, looking out into the backyard and talking like someone was there. I asked her who she was talking to, and she said, "That little boy out there." I looked outside. No one was there. So I asked her to describe him, and she gave me all these details. Clothes, hair, where he was standing. Just very specific things that made me pause. And things like that kept happening. The strange part is, now I've started seeing things too, and that had never happened to me before. I took a trip to Idaho to visit an old family friend, and I stayed in his den, kind of a living room area. One night, I saw what looked like 2 shadowy figures sitting on the staircase. Then I saw a tall, broad-shouldered man standing in the laundry room. Later, I saw another silhouette leaning over the couch, almost like it was looking down at me while I was lying there. The next day, I said to my friend, "You might want to get this house cleansed, because I saw some strange stuff last night." That's when he started telling me about his daughter, who has apparently seen things like that since she was little. She's 16 now, so I sat down with her and asked if her parents had ever told her about my daughter talking to her poppy. I started explaining the story, and then I said, "It was weird, but not as weird as last night when I saw a really tall..." Before I could finish, she interrupted and said, "Broad-shouldered man in the laundry room?" I just stared at her. Then I said, "Yeah." "And there were two people." She cut in again and said, "Sitting on the stairs?" And I said, "Yes." Then she told me there was another one that sometimes appeared over the couch, and one in her room that sits behind the door. She explained that she sees things almost every day, but she doesn't interact with them. She doesn't try to figure out whether they're speaking or what they want. She just notices them, lets them be, and moves on. I'm not an especially religious person, and I don't expect everyone to believe me. I know how it sounds, but these things happen to me, and they felt very real. Even now, my daughter will still make random comments about things she sees or hears. I don't make a huge deal out of it. I just make sure she feels safe, and then I write it down in a little notebook I keep. That's really why I wanted to share this with you. My daughter seems to be experiencing something very similar, and the way I see it is this. If it isn't hurting her, and she seems happy and unafraid, then I'm going to keep watching, keep listening, and let her talk about it. But I really do recommend writing these moments down when they happen. Write as much detail as you can, even the little things that don't seem important at the time. Because whatever this is, it's fascinating what children seem able to notice. So, this all started one night when my girlfriend Lila and I smoked some weed that honestly felt different from the start. It came from this one dealer we had gotten from before, and there had been a couple of times where it made us feel strange, like we kept catching movement in the corner of our eyes. Little flashes, shapes, that kind of thing. But this time, it felt heavier, darker. I didn't even smoke that much, but it hit me in a way I wasn't ready for. We went home, did our usual routine, and eventually got into bed. It was around 3 in the morning when I must have zoned out, or maybe fallen asleep for a bit. I woke up to the sound of my own voice. I was chanting under my breath. Not in English, not in any language I recognized. I remember snapping awake and thinking, what am I doing? I was confused and scared because it didn't feel like something I had chosen to do. So I stopped myself. Then I looked over at Lila. She was sitting straight up in bed, completely still, staring right at me with this blank expression. She was chanting too, in that same strange language, in this low, eerie voice that didn't feel like hers. Her face looked wrong somehow, uncanny, and her eyes looked almost black. That was when I felt it, this incredibly dark presence in the room. I don't know how else to describe it. It felt evil in a way I had never felt before in my life. My whole body reacted before my mind even caught up, and I jumped out of bed screaming. Not just yelling, screaming like something out of a horror movie. I had never made a sound like that before. I woke up the whole house. Lila suddenly looked normal again, but she was terrified. Her parents came running in, asking what happened, and I couldn't explain it. Every time I tried to think about saying it out loud, I felt this pressure around my throat, like something was stopping me. I had to breathe slowly just to make it ease up. So I told them it was a nightmare. But I told Lila the truth, or as much as I could. I said, "I can't talk about it. My body won't let me." The rest of that night was awful. Her face kept seeming like it was changing, almost morphing in tiny ways. She didn't feel real to me. Sometimes she didn't even feel like herself. A few times, when her face shifted in my mind, I had these sudden bursts of fear and anger, like I was terrified I might lose control or hurt her. That scared me more than anything. She broke down crying. She was scared for me, and honestly, I was scared of myself. We ended up lying on the couch, but I didn't sleep at all. Since then, I've had trouble sleeping. I usually stay awake until the sun comes up before I can relax enough to close my eyes. By morning, I felt a little more grounded, and I finally told her what I saw. Even then, talking about it gave me chills. I still felt that pressure in my throat. Even remembering it now makes my skin crawl. The next day, people's faces still seemed a little off to me. Not as intense, but enough that they felt fake sometimes. Even my own mother looked strange for a moment, and that really shook me. What scares me most is that I don't know what I was chanting. Part of me keeps worrying that maybe I said something I shouldn't have. Like maybe I gave something permission without realizing it. I know that sounds strange, but that's where my mind keeps going. I had sleep paralysis about a week before this happened too. And then, another night, a shoebox fell from the top of Lila's wardrobe right around midnight, which scared both of us. During the day, I mostly feel fine. But at night, the thoughts come back. The chills come back. That feeling comes back. Then, on Sunday around 1 in the afternoon, I woke up into sleep paralysis again. This time, I saw a dark figure hovering near my legs. He looked like a thin man, maybe around 5'9", lean, with tiny white dots where his eyes should have been. It wasn't as terrifying as the first experience, but it still felt wrong. And honestly, I just need it to stop. Before I answer, I just want to ask for a little clarity. When you talk about people refusing to acknowledge certain things, are you referring to me specifically? Or are you talking about your own experiences, or maybe a mindset you've noticed in other people? I'd answer a little differently depending on what you mean. But based on what you've shared, I'm going to respond as though you're speaking from your own experience. I've had paranormal experiences since I was about 6 years old. And honestly, it runs through my family in different ways. Some people accept it openly, some brush it off, and some act like it's nothing, even when you can tell deep down they know something happened. But whether someone believes in this stuff or not, sending harassment or death threats over it is never okay. That says far more about the person doing it than it does about anyone who is simply trying to talk openly about what they've experienced. And part of me thinks that kind of extreme reaction comes from fear. Not just ordinary fear either. More like the kind of fear people don't want to admit they have. Maybe they're terrified by the possibility that the world isn't as neat, simple, and explainable as they want it to be. I can't pretend I know exactly what's behind every strange thing people experience. A lot of it can be the mind playing tricks, stress, grief, shadows, bad lighting, camera glitches, sleep issues. All of that can create things that feel very real. But at the same time, I've had things happen in my life, and I've heard stories from people I trust that don't fit neatly into your brain made it up. Some moments just sit there, quietly refusing to be explained away. So when people react with cruelty or rage, I usually see it as fear that hasn't been dealt with. Fear of the unknown. Fear of being wrong. Fear of losing control over what they think reality is supposed to be. That still doesn't make it acceptable. I used to post some of my own experiences in online forums where people discussed paranormal stories, strange photos, odd videos, things like that. Not Reddit, just smaller communities where people were supposed to be comparing notes and having honest conversations. People would debate whether something was pareidolia, a camera issue, a reflection, an editing mistake, or maybe something genuinely unexplained. And that part was fine. I actually think questioning things is healthy. But whenever I shared something, the response was almost always hostile. Not curiosity, not, let's look at this carefully, just instant dismissal. People calling me fake, saying I was lying, acting like I was stupid for even bringing it up. Then those same people would turn around and praise each other for stories or photos that were no more convincing than mine. It started to feel less like a community and more like a little club where only certain people were allowed to be taken seriously. I really don't know what happened to some parts of the paranormal community. There are still good people out there, people who genuinely want to understand what's going on, people who are willing to ask questions without tearing someone down. But there are also clout chasers, attention seekers, gatekeepers, and people who only believe something if it comes from their own circle. So if you're dealing with threats, harassment, or people trying to shame you for what you believe or what you've experienced, please remember this. Those are not your people. Keep looking until you find spaces where people can question things without being cruel. It may take time, but it's worth finding a community that has both compassion and common sense. And I'll add this too. Don't just join groups that blindly validate every single thing you say. That's not healthy either. A good community should be able to say, "We believe you experienced something," while still being willing to ask, "What else could it have been?" That balance matters. As for me, I'm not a skeptic in the dismissive sense. I do believe there are things we don't fully understand. But I also try to rule out every practical explanation first because I care about being honest. If something can be explained by a normal cause, I want to know that. And if it can't, then I want to be just as honest about that too. I've had experiences that other people witnessed with me, things none of us could explain. Strange encounters, disturbing presences, moments that felt connected in ways that were far too specific to feel random. I've seen things that felt threatening. I've experienced things that felt almost inhuman, and I've had situations happen that still bother me when I think about them too long. One of the biggest wake-up calls happened after a shower. There was a handprint on the bathroom mirror. The mirror had steamed up everywhere except where this hand had been, like someone had pressed their palm against the glass before the steam formed around it. But the print itself was completely dry. It looked human at first, except the fingertips were stretched and pointed, almost like claws. I took a picture of it because I knew no one would believe me. And about a week later, that picture was gone from my phone. Not moved, not hidden, just gone. That's the kind of thing I can't easily explain, and I don't expect everyone to believe it. But I know what I saw, and I know how it felt. So when people talk about the paranormal, I try to leave room for both sides, the practical and the mysterious. Because sometimes the truth is simple, and sometimes it knocks quietly from the other side of the mirror. I remember we made the board ourselves, just out of some scrap wood that was lying around. Nothing fancy, nothing polished, just a rough little Ouija board scratched together because we were bored, tired, and probably a little too curious for our own good. One of the guys on my team, Corporal Dreves, swore he had something following him. He called it his guardian angel, though the way he talked about it never felt quite that simple. He said he could speak to it through the board. A few of us didn't really believe him, but we wanted to see it for ourselves. We found this empty supply closet inside a bombed-out college building. There was a small cracked window near the top of the wall, and just enough moonlight came through to let us see the board. It was Dreves, Doc, Corporal Vale, and me. Dreves didn't do any ceremony. No candles, no chanting, nothing dramatic like in the movies. He just looked down at the board and called out to it. He called it Elias. And then the planchette started moving. None of us had our hands on it. That was the first thing that made the room feel different. Dreves said it was Elias. He said Elias could do strange things, including answering questions you only thought about. So of course, I tested it. There was a girl back home I had feelings for. Nobody knew about her. I had never mentioned her name. Not to Dreves, not to Doc, not to anyone there. I took my hands away completely and asked the question silently in my head. The planchette moved. Letter by letter, it gave me her initials. I just stared at it. That was the moment my doubts started to crack. We asked a few more questions after that, and eventually Vale got uncomfortable and left. The room had gotten darker by then, so I pulled out my Zippo and used it for light. There wasn't any wind in that closet. There couldn't have been. And then I had this stupid idea. I asked Dreves if I could try something. Not a real question exactly, more like a challenge. He said go ahead. So I held the lighter in my hand and thought, knock on the door. The planchette slid to no. I asked again, silently. No. That annoyed me. Or maybe I was trying to act braver than I felt. I started mocking Elias in my head, thinking it was weak, thinking it needed to prove it was real. Then I thought, blow out the flame. The planchette moved hard across the board, fast, angry almost. No. I pushed again in my mind. No. I was just about to insult it, not out loud, just in my thoughts, when I felt something behind me. It was like an ice-cold breath on the back of my neck. It moved down my shoulder, along my arm, straight toward my hand. And then the Zippo went out. Doc jumped up so fast he nearly knocked into the wall. He ran out of that closet and down the hall without saying a word. Dreves looked at me and asked what I had told it to do. I told him. His face changed. He warned me not to anger Elias again. I wish I could say that scared me enough to stop. It did scare me. It shook me badly. But it also pulled me in deeper. Fear and curiosity can make a dangerous little cocktail. After that, I wanted one of my own. I talked Dreves into showing me how. One night, when things were active outside and the whole place felt charged, we went up onto a rooftop and called something in. Something answered. I couldn't understand its name, not really. It felt too sharp or too tangled to say properly, so I shortened it and called it Zane. It accepted that. After that, every once in a while, I would still call on the original one, Elias, the one tied to Dreves, just to see if it would do that mind-reading trick again. But there weren't many people around who were willing to sit with a spirit board for long, especially after hearing what had happened. I still own a few boards. I use them from time to time. I don't pretend to understand what they are. Some people say they're tools for speaking to demons. Some say they're portals. Some say nothing good ever comes through them, and whatever answers is never what it claims to be. All I know is this. I wouldn't recommend playing with one unless you're ready for things to follow you, haunt you, or get worse than you expected. And I do think some people are more open to it than others. If you're looking for results, you'll probably get more from someone sensitive to energy, someone who has that strange doorway already half open in them. But one thing I'll say for sure, no matter how much they claim to know the future, I don't think any of them have the winning lottery numbers. Honestly, I've always been a bit skeptical about this kind of thing. I'm not someone who jumps straight to ghosts or spirits or anything like that. But there are a couple of things I've been through that I still think about because I was there. I saw it. And even now, I don't really know how to explain it. One night, I was at a friend's house. There were 4 of us there. Me and the guy who lived there were just sitting back, watching, because the other 2 had found out he had a Ouija board and kept asking him to bring it out. Eventually, he gave in. They set it up on the floor in the front room and lit a few candles around it. I turned the main light off, so the room had that dim, flickering glow. But the thing is, they weren't really taking it seriously. They were laughing, messing around, joking with each other while they got ready. Then they said this little prayer, something about protecting themselves while they played the game. After that, they asked if anyone was there. And almost straight after they asked, the light bulb from the ceiling socket dropped out and hit Toby on the shoulder. Then it rolled off him and landed on the rug beside him. We all just froze for a second and looked at each other. The timing was just too perfect. The bulb was out, obviously, and they decided to carry on anyway. Then, a little while later, the kitchen light came on by itself. Now there were 4 of us. 2 were sitting on the floor in the middle of the front room, and me and my friend were on the sofa. I was the closest one to the switches. There was one behind me by the door and another one in the kitchen. Nobody was near either of them. I got up and turned it off. Not long after that, they stopped playing. My friend put the bulb back in, but it had blown, probably from falling and hitting the floor. So he took one from the hallway and put that in instead, and it worked fine. Later on, we were just sitting there watching TV, trying to act normal, and the light came on again by itself. He turned it off. Then, later, while the light was actually on, it went off by itself. When we tried to turn it back on, it didn't work, so we assumed the bulb had blown again. But when he tested the same bulb in the hallway, it worked perfectly. The strange thing was, that ceiling socket stopped working for 2 days after that. Then it just started working normally again, like nothing had happened. Before that Ouija board came out, there had never been any problem with it. I know people can say it was coincidence, and maybe the bulb falling out was one. That was my first thought too. But then the kitchen light, the socket, the bulb working elsewhere, all of it happening after they'd been messing with that board. I remember sitting there with goosebumps. I used to want to try a Ouija board myself. After that night, I changed my mind completely. It taught me something. If you can't see it, don't mess with it. Respect it, because you really don't know what you're opening the door to. And it wasn't the only strange thing I've experienced. My childhood home was built in the 1870s, and there were always odd things going on there. Things would move. My sister used to talk to a little girl she said sat at the end of her bed. I heard noises all the time, but my mom always brushed it off and said it was probably a mouse. But I knew it wasn't a mouse. It wasn't just little scurrying noises. Sometimes it sounded like banging. Other times it was scratching, but not like claws. More like something heavy sliding across something. When I was little, maybe between 5 and 8 years old, I had this strange fear about knocking or banging sounds. If I knocked my bed twice, I had to knock 2 more times, because for some reason I believed that if I knocked 3 times, whatever was there would come and get me. I don't even know where that thought came from. I was just a kid. But I remember lying in bed with my fingers in my ears because I was so scared. I also used to have the same dream over and over. Wolves were running through the house, and I'd escape by jumping out of my bedroom window onto the flat roof below. Funny enough, wolves are my favorite animal now. As I got older, I sort of got used to the house. Things seemed to calm down, or maybe I just stopped reacting as much. Years later, when I told my mom about the things I remembered, she told me something I hadn't known before. One night, she thought my dad had come into the room and sat down on the edge of the bed. She felt the mattress dip. But my dad was still downstairs. And the same thing happened to him another time. He thought my mom had sat on the bed, but she was in the bath. Then, when I was 22, my parents went away on holiday and I was home alone. I was downstairs watching TV when I heard drawers upstairs opening and closing 3 times. At first, I thought maybe my sister had come in without me hearing. I called out, but nobody answered. So I went upstairs to check. Nobody was there. I was definitely alone. I went back downstairs and called my girlfriend. I sat down and told her what had just happened. A few minutes later, there was this huge smashing sound, like someone had thrown a brick through a window. I jumped up and ran to check the kitchen, the back door, the bathroom windows, everything. Nothing was broken. Then I noticed something. Just before my parents went away, the front of the cutlery drawer had fallen off, so the cutlery tray was sitting on the kitchen counter. I thought about the sound I'd just heard, and it did sound a bit like cutlery crashing around. So I lifted the tray slightly and let it drop. It made the exact same sound. That was the most unsettled I'd felt in that house since I was a child. It didn't feel like a random noise. It felt like something was trying to get my attention, like something was playing with me. I still don't claim to know what any of it was, but I know how it felt. And I know I never forgot it. I'm sharing this as my own experience, and honestly, no one has to believe me. I understand how it sounds. If someone told me the same thing years ago, I might have said, maybe your mind was just playing tricks on you. And maybe that is what some people will think. I can accept that. But what happened to me felt real. This was a long time ago, during a period when I was physically unwell. My body was struggling, but my mind was taking a hit too. I was exhausted, emotional, and worn down in a way I had never felt before. And during that time, I began to feel this presence around me. It didn't feel comforting. It felt like something was making me weaker. The best way I can describe it is that it seemed to feed off anything negative inside me. Trauma, heartbreak, sadness, anger, fear, all of it. And it did not just feel like it was feeding from those emotions. It felt like it was increasing them too, almost encouraging me to sink deeper into them. Then, something changed. I started working on my mindset. I stopped giving so much space to the fear and heaviness. I tried not to feed it with my attention. And after that, whatever I had been feeling seemed to fade away. Now, I know someone who does not believe in this kind of thing might say, "No, Clara, that was just your mind reacting to illness and stress." And I get that. I really do. Part of me would love for it to be that simple. But the experience stayed with me because it felt so present, so outside of me, and so deeply real. Since then, I've wondered about something else. There is someone close to me who seems to be affected more than I am. I have always tried to help her, especially because before all of this, there was no activity in the home. Nothing strange, nothing that made me question anything. But over time, I started wondering whether what is happening around her could be connected to her own anxiety or emotional pain. Maybe it is something like a poltergeist created by inner turmoil. Or maybe there is something around her that does not have good intentions. I do not say that lightly, and I do not claim to know for sure. I have not seen anything with my eyes, but I have heard sounds before. Sounds that felt like they could have come from something present in the room. I have trained myself not to panic when that happens. I tell myself, it could be a normal sound. It could be my brain misreading something. People hear things sometimes. And even if part of me wonders whether it is something else, I try not to react with fear. I do not want to give it energy. That has become important to me. Before, I could hear sounds that were neutral, or even strange, and I was reassured by the thought that it did not mean I was crazy. It did not automatically mean there was something to be terrified of. Sometimes things happen, and we do not know what they are. The part I have not told her about is the coldness. There are times when I can sense cold air near her, almost in her direction. Many times, I have thought maybe a window was open, or there was a draft, or something in the house was not working properly. I would check for a natural cause, and there would be nothing. It is not dramatic like in horror movies. The whole room does not turn icy. You cannot see your breath. It is more subtle than that. A patch of coldness near her, around her, and then it is gone. I have not noticed that around anyone else. Sometimes, when I reach out to touch her, not because I am trying to test anything, but just to be affectionate or friendly, her skin feels cold compared to mine. And yes, that could be completely natural. People have different circulation. People get cold. I know that. But when it happens, I am never as cold as she is. Still, I keep telling myself not to jump to conclusions. I have had moments earlier in life where certain areas in a home felt wrong, like they did not want us there. I cannot explain it better than that. It was not the same kind of coldness, but I remember feeling that I knew something was off. And later, because of what happened afterward, I was glad I trusted that feeling. Right now, I am trying to stay balanced. I do not want to frighten her. I do not want to say, "You are so negative," because that could come out cruel, even if I meant it with concern. People are sensitive, especially when they are already hurting. I believe we are all good at our core, but I also think we can suffer deeply when we are not in balance. And sometimes, when someone is carrying anxiety, sadness, fear, or anger for too long, it can feel like something gathers around that. Whether that something is spiritual, emotional, psychological, or something I simply do not understand, I cannot say for certain. All I know is what I felt. And what I felt was real enough that I still think about it. So this happened to my mom, Marissa, back on Christmas Eve in the early 90s, when she was still a teenager. At the time, she shared a small room and even the bed with her younger sister, who was about 13. The room was always really dark at night, except for this old alarm clock in the corner. It had those glowing blue numbers, and they cast just enough light to make shapes in the room feel almost alive. She told me she woke up suddenly because she heard something gagging. At first, she thought it was the dog, but then she realized the dog wasn't even sleeping in their room that night. So she just lay there, listening. Whatever it was, it sounded wrong. Loud, wet, harsh. Not like anything that should have been in that room. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she slowly lifted her head and looked toward the foot of the bed. And that's when she saw it. She said there was this huge black shape standing there. Not just a shadow, not her imagination, but a solid mass of darkness. It was so tall it seemed to reach all the way to the ceiling. Then it started moving. And when it moved, she said it sounded like someone dragging a metal garden rake across the carpet. That alone would have been horrifying, but she said the worst part was the sound coming from it. She never really found the right words for it. The closest she could get was that it sounded like a record playing backward, except it was layered with voices, men and women together, all twisted into something unnatural. By then, she was completely frozen. One of her feet had slipped out from under the blanket near the edge of the bed, and as this thing moved closer, she could feel this bitter cold coming off it. She was terrified it would notice she was awake. So as carefully and slowly as she could, she pulled her foot back under the covers. She said she managed to do it just before the thing passed. Then it kept moving across the room and, somehow, straight into the wall. The voices stopped. The scraping stopped. Everything went silent. For a second, she didn't know if she'd really seen it, or if she was the only one. Then her little sister whispered into the dark, "Are you awake?" My mom said, "Yeah." And her sister whispered back, "What the hell was that?" That was the moment she knew it had been real. Both of them wanted the light on immediately, but the switch was near the bedroom door. To get to it, one of them would have to get out of bed and cross the room barefoot, and neither of them could bring themselves to do it right away. They were too scared to even put their feet on the floor. Finally, my mom worked up the nerve. She jumped out of bed, ran to the switch, flipped the light on, and leapt back into bed as fast as she could. She said they stayed awake the rest of the night with the light on. They didn't sleep, and they barely spoke. They just sat there in silence until morning, when the rest of the family got up to open presents. And even now, all these years later, she still doesn't know what it was. What she does know is that after that night, she could never sleep in complete darkness again. She also said the house changed after that. Things would go missing for no reason. The television would suddenly blast to life with loud static in the middle of the night. Her father once said he felt two hands grab his shoulders while he was driving to work, so hard it nearly made him lose control of the car. He was alone. Eventually the family moved, hoping they'd leave whatever it was behind. But according to my mom, they didn't. She believes it followed them, and that whatever entered that room on Christmas Eve stayed close to the family for decades afterward. I still think about that story sometimes. I honestly don't know what to make of it, but I can understand why she never forgot it. I used to work as a cook in senior living communities, and while I was there, I downloaded a couple of those ghost hunting apps, just for fun. You know, something silly to mess around with. There was always a lot of activity on them, which honestly felt pretty normal given where I worked. Then life got heavy. I lost my job, had court stuff hanging over me, and I completely forgot those apps were even still on my phone. One night last May, maybe 2 or 3 weeks after Mother's Day, my daughter and the kids had given me flowers and a balloon. The flowers were fading by then, but that balloon was still in the left corner of my apartment, just staying there. For nearly 2 weeks it hadn't shifted, hadn't turned, hadn't done anything. That night, my son Mason had my phone. He walked into the kitchen talking to it, and I figured he was joking around with his aunt, or maybe one of his cousins. I was cooking, not really paying close attention. Then I heard him tell the phone, plain as day, "Make the balloon turn 3 times." And that balloon slowly turned to the right. 1 turn. 2. 3. Mason was thrilled. Absolutely thrilled. I was the exact opposite. I grabbed the phone from him, and he took off running through the kitchen into the living room to tell his brother like he was delivering breaking news to the whole house. While he was doing that, the EVP feature on my phone suddenly spoke. It said, "Son." Now, if you've never used one of those apps, there are all these little features built in. The EVP part runs while the camera is up, so you can record or snap pictures while it's going. I was walking from the kitchen toward the living room when I heard the word. I looked down at my phone to check what it had said, and when I lifted my eyes, that balloon was drifting right behind my head. Right behind me. I did not enjoy that moment, not even a little. And before I could fully process what was happening, my Govee lights shut off. I don't use the overhead lights much, so suddenly the whole place dropped into darkness. I ran into the living room, trying to remember where I'd left the remote. While I was reaching around in the dark, the EVP spoke again. It said, "Further, reach further." At that point, no, absolutely not. I went straight to the wall and flipped on the overhead light. And sure enough, when I looked back, the remote had been just a little farther than where my hand stopped. If I'd reached a bit more, I would have grabbed it. And yes, the balloon had followed me into the dark and all the way over toward the light switch. I deflated it that same night, immediately. Didn't even do the usual thing where you suck the helium out first and make the ridiculous squeaky voice. I always do that. It makes me laugh every time. But not that night. Not with that balloon. There's one more part to this that really stayed with me. Ever since I moved into that apartment, which was just a one-bedroom with my kids in the bedroom and me sleeping on the couch, that room had always felt off. Especially one spot near the window. It felt like something more than being watched. It felt like being stared at. Really stared at. I kept that feeling to myself at first because I didn't want to scare my kids or sound dramatic. But then they started refusing to sleep in their room. And these are kids who had always been pretty independent sleepers. They told me they were terrified of that same exact spot by the window. About a week later, I told my neighbors what had happened with the balloon and the app. That's when they told me the previous tenant had died in that bedroom. He had been disabled and had trouble moving around, and the place where he was found was that spot by the window. Honestly, that part broke my heart more than anything else. My neighbors said he had been a kind man, and from everything that happened, as unnerving as it was for me, I get the feeling he probably still is. You know, back in September 2001, my family and I moved out of a house I'd owned for years. I'd bought it in the late 1980s, long before I was married. It was an older place, likely built sometime in the 1960s, maybe the early 70s. At first, it was just my house. Then later, it became our family home, with my wife and our 2 daughters. Because the driveway was so steep, moving everything out was a bit of a drawn-out process. We couldn't get a big truck up there properly, so we had to use smaller vehicles and do it over several days. By the final day, we had everything settled into the new house. I told my wife, Mara, that I'd head back one last time just to make sure we hadn't left anything behind, and then I'd drop the keys off with the real estate agent at the local shopping center. We'd already handed over one set of keys, which had been mine, so I took Mara's set with me. And that's where the first strange thing happened. When I got back to the old house, I went to unlock the front door. It had 2 locks, and neither one would open. The keys turned, but nothing actually unlocked. It was as if they fit, but somehow didn't work anymore. I rang Mara and asked if she was sure those keys were the right ones. She told me she'd locked up with them the day before, and they worked perfectly. So I called the agent and asked if I could come by and collect my set of keys, the ones we'd left earlier. I picked them up, drove back, and this time the door opened without any trouble at all. I went inside and did a proper final check, opening cupboards, looking through the rooms, making sure we hadn't missed anything. Everything seemed normal until I stepped into one of the 3 bedrooms, the one we'd used as a study and little library. There was a small whiteboard fixed to the wall that I decided to leave behind because it was attached pretty firmly. It still had a couple of phone numbers and a few notes scribbled on it. I don't remember exactly what was written there now. I reached up, dampened my fingertip, and started to rub the writing away. The moment I did, my entire body turned ice cold. I don't mean a chill or a shiver. I mean a cold so deep and sudden that I'd never felt anything like it before, and honestly, I haven't felt anything like it since. At exactly the same time, I heard the sound of a woman crying, maybe moaning.
What made it even worse
was that it didn't seem to come from one part of the room. It felt like it was everywhere, all around me. I completely panicked. I bolted out of the room, rushed out of the house, got in the car, and drove straight back to our new place. When I walked through the door, Mara looked at me and immediately asked if I was all right. She said I was white as a sheet. I told her what had happened, though even as I said it, it sounded unreal. But I know what I felt, and I know what I heard. I still think about it, even now. For years afterward, maybe 10 or 12 years, I had the same dream over and over again, every few weeks. In it, someone had been killed and buried beneath that house. The dream never really changed. It always played out the same way, and it always woke me in a sweat. So that's my story. I've never been able to explain it. And just for context, I'm a semi-retired IT consultant in my 60s. I'm not someone who scares easily, and I like to think I'm practical, thoughtful, and fairly open-minded. But whatever happened in that house that day has stayed with me ever since. I should probably start by telling you that this house was never just some random place to me. It belonged to one of my closest friends, and I stayed there more times than I could count when we were growing up. I knew the long driveway, the pond out front, the way the place looked at night, the sound of the lake nearby. It was familiar, safe, at least on paper. But over the years, little things would happen there. Strange things. Easy to brush off in the moment, but harder to ignore once you started stacking them together. There were all these small incidents. His parents would get annoyed because the freezer, the fridge, or the cupboard doors would be left open, even on nights when we barely left his room. I remember playing hide and seek once and feeling absolutely sure someone was standing right behind me in one of the bedrooms. The room always felt colder than the others. When I turned to leave, I felt what seemed like a hand press against the middle of my back. I spun around, and nobody was there. Another time, a bunch of us were outside playing manhunt across the property. There were usually 8 or 9 of us running around for hours, laughing, yelling, being stupid kids. But twice, on 2 completely different nights with 2 completely different friends, someone suddenly wanted to end the game and call home early. Both of them looked pale and rattled, like they had seen something they couldn't explain. Then there was the night after our grade 8 graduation, when 4 of us were sleeping over. We had all just decided to call it a night when, the second everything went quiet, the whole house stereo system blasted music out of nowhere. Stuff like that happened in pieces, just enough that you could dismiss it, until one night you couldn't anymore. My friend, who I'll call Corey, hated talking about it. If I ever mentioned something weird while we were actually in the house, he would shut it down immediately. Not jokingly either. He meant it. At the time, I thought he was just superstitious. Looking back, I think he knew more than he wanted to admit. So here's the night that changed everything for me. Corey's house was huge. Not just big for a family house huge. I mean a full-on mansion. 5 bedrooms, a live-in maid suite, a driveway that felt like it went on forever, and the whole place sitting near Lake Ontario. One night, his parents were away at a wedding, and it was just me, Corey, and his dog, who I'll call Mac. Mac was the best dog I've ever known. Calm, unbelievably smart, perfectly trained. I never remember hearing that dog bark, not once. He had this quiet awareness about him that made you trust him. That night, we were just being teenage idiots, eating pizza and wings with the money his parents had left for us, watching some documentary about indigenous history and culture. We were joking around, doing dumb impressions, not thinking much of it. Nothing felt wrong yet. At some point, Corey got up to put the leftover pizza in the kitchen. When he came back, something had changed. I could see it on him right away. His face looked off. His energy had gone flat. It wasn't even that late, maybe a little before 11, but he came back and said he just wanted to head upstairs and go to bed. I remember thinking that was weird, but I didn't push it. Later, I was lying in bed, still awake, staring across the room. On the nightstand beside me was a pair of wired earbuds, and I watched them move. Not fall suddenly, not slip in some quick, natural way. I watched the cord slowly slide, inch by inch, over the edge of the table like something was gently pulling it downward. There was barely enough of the wire hanging off for gravity to make sense of it, but I saw it happen. I watched until the weight finally took over and the earbuds dropped to the floor. A minute later, Corey came into the room with Mac, and I told him what I'd seen, kind of carefully, because I knew he hated hearing that stuff in the house. He looked at me with this weird mix of anger and panic and said, "Are you messing with me right now? Because I'm already freaked out." That stopped me cold. I asked him what he meant. He told me that while he was in the kitchen, a 2-liter bottle of soda that had been sitting on the counter tipped over by itself and rolled off. He picked it up, and right as he did, the fridge door slammed shut hard enough to make him jump. That was when he decided we were done for the night. Even after that, I still tried to explain it away. I told him maybe the earbuds had just shifted. Maybe we were both tired and getting into our own heads. Honestly, I was trying to calm myself down as much as him. So we turned off the lights and got into bed. We had only been lying there for maybe a couple of minutes, just talking quietly in the dark, when the lamp on the nightstand beside Corey switched on. Not a regular switch lamp either. It was one of those touch lamps where you just tap the base or the metal and it lights up. We both went dead silent. We looked at each other, then at the lamp. Then it turned off. I don't think either of us even had time to breathe before it switched back on. And that was when Mac started growling. Not a little warning rumble. A real, low, focused growl aimed directly at that nightstand. I had known that dog for years. I had never seen him act like that. Never. He stood rigid, staring into that corner like he was locked onto something we couldn't see. The whole thing probably lasted less than half a minute, but it stretched out in my memory like it went on forever. Then the lamp shut off again, and Mac exploded out of the room. He tore through the doorway like he was chasing something, and the bedroom door slammed hard behind him. Corey and I jumped up and ran after him. We heard him thundering down the stairs all the way to the basement. We got halfway down and stopped. Even in broad daylight, his basement had always felt wrong to me. Dark, unfinished in parts, cold in a way that didn't feel normal. And now, in the middle of all that, we could hear Mac down there. Then we heard him yelp. Not bark, not growl, a yelp. We started yelling for him to come back, both of us panicked. A few seconds later, he came running up from the basement, tail tucked so tightly underneath him it looked painful. He was trembling. That was it. We didn't debate it anymore. We shoved on our shoes, grabbed what we could, and got out of that house as fast as humanly possible. We walked all the way down the driveway with Mac and stood near the road trying to figure out what to do. Part of us was still trying to be rational. Do we go back in? Do we wait it out? Do we call someone? Then we looked up at the house and saw the bedroom light come back on. The same bedroom we had just run out of. That decided it. We called a friend who lived maybe 20 minutes away on foot and asked if we could crash there for the night. We didn't care how ridiculous we sounded. We were not going back inside. Now here's the part that really stayed with me. Corey's dad had security cameras installed around parts of the house. I never knew exactly why, but later on Corey told me they had caught things on video. One clip showed the fridge, the freezer, and multiple kitchen cabinets opening on their own at the same time. I actually saw that one myself. It explained a lot of those arguments from years before, when his parents thought we'd been leaving everything open. He also said there were other clips too. Shadows, movements, things that were harder to explain. I never saw those with my own eyes. so I won't pretend I did. But I believed him after that night. Years later, his family moved out, and once they did, two things happened that still bother me when I think about them. His dad had pretty severe sleep apnea while they lived there, and it eased up almost immediately after they left. His mom used to get awful vertigo spells in that house, and those stopped too. Just gone. Then his dad admitted something he should have admitted a long time earlier. When the house was first being built, workers had uncovered what looked like multiple old burial sites, human remains in the ground. Instead of reporting it, he kept it quiet because he didn't want construction delayed for months while the property was investigated. I've never forgotten that. And I still can't shake the timing either. The one night everything truly erupted was the same night we had been sitting there joking around and mocking the documentary we were watching. Maybe that meant nothing. Maybe it meant everything. I'm not going to stand here and tell you I know exactly what was in that house or who it belonged to. I just know something was there. Before that night, I had no interest in the supernatural. I didn't want stories, theories, or ghost hunts. I would rather have laughed it off and moved on. But after living through that, after seeing that dog react the way he did, after seeing that light turn on and off while we sat frozen in bed, I couldn't dismiss it anymore. So that's the story. I'm telling it exactly because it stayed with me. Because even now, years later, I can still picture that house from the road, that upstairs light glowing again after we ran, like it was watching us leave. I need to tell you about this dream because it did not feel like a dream at all. It felt like I had slipped into some ancient world, something half myth and half memory, as if I had wandered into a story older than history itself. I was not exactly me there. I was a shape-shifting fox named Radhika, and even though part of me felt young and confused, another part felt impossibly old, like I had already lived through ages I could not count. And then there was him. He called himself Ritvij. That name caught me off guard because it belonged to someone familiar from my real life, my cousin. But this being looked nothing like him. That was what made it so unsettling. It felt as though he had borrowed a name I trusted just to come closer, just to make me let my guard down. From the beginning, something about him felt wrong beneath all the beauty. The first time we stood near each other, he made this strange comment about our size difference. I was so much smaller than him. He looked at me almost amused and said something like, "You're still young." And I remember pushing back, telling him, "No, I'm not. I'm grown. This is who I am." But he only smiled and told me I would become much more, that I would grow. It was such an odd thing to hear, and somehow it made me feel small in a way that had nothing to do with height. Then he told me I had kissed him once while I was drunk. I could not clearly remember it, and that made the whole thing worse. It left me with that awful feeling of having lost control of my own story for a moment. He said that the very first time he saw me, he knew I longed for him. And I cannot explain it properly, but that line stayed with me because it felt invasive, like he was naming a hunger inside me before I had ever spoken it aloud. All around us, people were laughing. Not kindly, not gently. They laughed like I was the only one who did not understand the rules of whatever world I had fallen into. I felt exposed, confused, almost ashamed, as if something deeply personal was happening in front of an audience, and everyone understood it except me. And time there was not normal. It stretched in impossible ways. It felt as though I lived through lifetime after lifetime, and even though most of those years are blurred now, I remember the feeling of them. Longing, solitude, waiting. In every version of that existence, I seemed to go on without ever truly belonging to anyone, without a lasting mate, without ever fully remembering him. Not for centuries. Not for what felt like 300 years or more. Then one day, after all that time, he came back. At first he appeared as a black cat, silent and watchful, like he was testing whether I would recognize him. Then right there in front of me, he changed. The cat gave way to a crow, dark and gleaming, and then from the crow he became himself. I still cannot shake that image. He looked almost unreal, too striking to belong to any ordinary world. Taller than any man should be, wrapped in flowing black robes, with hair as dark as midnight falling down his back. His eyes were black too, and his skin was pale in that moonlit, otherworldly way that made him look less human and more like something ancient pretending to be human. And yet I knew it was him. That was the strangest part. Everything about him had changed, and still I knew. I remember what I looked like too, with an odd clarity. Pale skin, wide eyes, lashes too long to seem real, lips soft and full, almost like I had been shaped into something delicate and unreal myself. There was something doll-like about me, something celestial, and in that dream, I was aware of it. I was aware of how he looked at me. I was aware of how deeply I wanted his touch. That is the part I still do not fully know how to say out loud. Because even with all the fear, all the manipulation, all the signs that something was off, I felt drawn to him with an intensity I have never known in waking life. When he touched me, especially when he held my face in his hands, it felt impossibly right, as though my whole being leaned toward him before I had time to think. I did not feel the usual discomfort I would feel in real life. In that world, with him, closeness felt overwhelming and natural at once. Not safe exactly, but irresistible. There was even a moment when I almost became lucid, almost remembered myself. It was like surfacing through deep water. I had this flicker of awareness, this sudden thought that, in real life, I do not even like kissing, that something here did not add up. But then he looked straight at me with this dark, knowing intensity, as if he could see that I was beginning to wake. And in that moment, it felt like he would not let me go, like he was silently telling me, "Stay." The dream pulled me back under. Later, he lifted me into his arms as if I weighed nothing. It felt effortless for him, and strangely grounding for me, as though being held by him erased the distance between fear and desire. Everything in that moment felt too vivid, too emotionally detailed, too layered to dismiss as just a random dream. His eyes held something unreadable, something powerful and ancient, and almost possessive, and that made it even harder to look away. What unsettles me most is that even through all the confusion, I still wanted him there. I still recognized him. I still felt that pull. And when I finally woke up, I did not wake cleanly. I had slept for nearly 20 hours, and even then it felt unwilling, like I had been torn out of another life before I was ready. I had an exam the next day, real life waiting for me, but part of me wanted to sink back into sleep and return to that strange place. I even woke a few times during it, but every time the dream kept going, like it had its own current, and I was being carried by it whether I chose it or not. That is what stays with me now. Not just the beauty of it, and not just the fear. It is the fact that both existed together. The manipulation, the longing, the recognition, the unease. Something in me knew all along that not everything was right, and still I could not stop wanting him in that moment. That is the part I cannot forget. So, I want to tell you something that still lingers in the back of my mind. I've never really been the kind of person who believes in ghosts or spirits. I've always figured that strange things happen, sure, but there's usually some logical explanation hiding somewhere in the weeds. Still, there was one stretch of my life that shook me enough to leave a crack in that certainty. This happened not long after my wife and I had our first baby, back in early 2020. She was on maternity leave, and I was driving nearly an hour each way to work every day. So we decided to move out of the city and settle in a little town much closer to my job. We found this wreck of a house for a price that felt almost suspiciously good, and to us, it looked like a chance to build something of our own. The place had a history. We were told an older man named Martin had lived there most of his life. People in town knew him as a heavy drinker, and the house had been neglected for years. Then he met a woman who helped him get his life together, and the two of them started fixing the place up so she could move in. But not long after the renovations began, Martin got sick, ended up in the hospital, and passed away. She didn't want the house after that, and she sold it unfinished. That's how it landed with us. Once we started tearing into it, we realized just how old it really was. The paperwork said it dated back to the 1890s, one of the first homes built in town. We stripped it down to the studs, no insulation anywhere, square nails in the framing, old lath and plaster packed with animal hair. It felt less like remodeling and more like excavating. Eventually, despite all the delays and chaos, we got it ready enough to move in with our daughter. And that's when things changed. From the first night in the house, the nursery felt wrong. Not while I was renovating it, interestingly enough. I spent hours in there hanging drywall, wiring a ceiling fan, painting, building a closet. Nothing. But once the crib was in place, once the dresser and rocker and all the baby things made it feel like a lived-in room, something about it shifted. Every time I walked in there, especially at night, I felt like I wasn't alone. Not in a dramatic way. Just that quiet, unmistakable feeling that someone was standing just outside your line of sight, watching. I'd sit in the rocker holding my daughter while she drifted off, and the whole room would feel heavy. There were nights I'd lay her in the crib and feel guilty leaving her there, like I was walking away from something I couldn't explain, but deeply didn't trust. And the weirdest part was, she slept beautifully. Nothing seemed to bother her at all. So I kept telling myself it was stress, exhaustion, a new house, too much imagination, whatever would make it sound normal. I mentioned it to my wife, and she admitted the house gave her a strange feeling too, but not the way it did for me. To her, it just felt like an old house full of creaks and history. To me, that one room felt occupied. A few months later, the ceiling fan in the nursery started turning on by itself. It happened enough that it stopped feeling random. We'd leave the house, make sure the fan was off, and come home to find it spinning at full speed. The ceilings were high, so I'd installed one controlled by a remote. At one point, thinking maybe the remote was malfunctioning, I took the batteries out and put it away in a drawer. Didn't matter. We'd still come home and the fan would be going. That got my wife's attention. Suddenly, it wasn't just me having a bad feeling in the dark. Now there was something physical happening too, and it was always in that room. So that went on for a while. The bad feeling, the fan, the constant effort to act like we were being rational adults in a perfectly normal home. Then came the final stage of the renovation. We were having insulation sprayed underneath the house. It was a bungalow, no basement, just a shallow crawl space. The insulation crew came out, took one look under there, and told me they couldn't start until the garbage was cleared away. They offered to do it for extra money, but I decided I'd save the cash and handle it myself. I spent the whole day crawling around under that house, dragging out decades of junk, old siding, bits of pipe, tangled wire. Then farther in, older things, broken dishes, tiny medicine bottles, rusted utensils. The deeper I went, the older it all seemed. And then I found something that stopped me cold. Tucked in one corner beneath the front part of the house was a pile of broken children's furniture. I hauled it out into the driveway piece by piece and laid it all out. It looked like a little rocking chair and an old wooden cradle, the kind that rocks side to side. Both were child-sized, both very old, and both looked like they'd been deliberately smashed. Not worn out, not collapsed from age, broken. By then the sun was starting to go down, and I was standing there in the driveway staring at them when that same feeling came over me, that awful watched feeling I'd had in the nursery night after night. That's when it clicked. The spot where I'd found that furniture was directly under the nursery, right beneath it, almost dead center. I'm telling you, every hair on my body stood up. I didn't know what I believed, but in that moment I believed I wanted those things gone. This next part is a little embarrassing, but it's the truth. I didn't know anything about hauntings or rituals or any of that. The only reference point I had was some old supernatural TV show I used to watch, where they'd burn an object and salt it if they thought a spirit was attached to it. Ridiculous? Maybe. But when you're standing in your driveway at dusk, looking at broken antique nursery furniture you just pulled from under your baby's room, your standards for what counts as a good plan get real flexible. So I built a big fire. I threw the rocking chair and cradle into it. Then I grabbed a full container of salt from the kitchen and poured the whole thing over the flames. I stayed out there for hours, stirring the fire until every last bit of that wood was reduced to ash and coals. And after that, everything stopped. Just stopped. The room felt normal. The fan never turned on by itself again. That constant sense of being watched vanished like a switch had been flipped. The house became just a house. I still don't know what to make of it. Maybe I let myself get creeped out and built a whole story around coincidences. Maybe finding those broken pieces under the nursery gave my mind a way to close the loop and finally relax. That's the explanation I usually offer myself. But I can't fully dismiss how real it felt while it was happening, or how sudden the silence was afterward. It didn't make me a true believer, but it did leave me with a hesitation I never had before. We only stayed in that house for about another year. We found out we were expecting our second child, and around the same time I got a much better job several hours away, so we moved again. We've never had another experience like that in any home since. Still, every now and then, I think about that room, about what was buried beneath it, and about how, for one stretch of time, I lived in a house that felt like it was holding its breath. I wanted to tell you about something strange that's stayed with me for years, because every now and then it comes back so clearly that it rattles me a little. I keep having this dream about an apartment, or maybe more like a house split up like an apartment, and even though I know for a fact I never lived there, it feels deeply familiar. Not dream familiar either. I mean the kind of familiar that settles into your memory like it belongs there. Sometimes, when I'm mentally listing all the places I've lived, my mind still tries to include it before I catch myself. That's how real it feels. In the dream, I'm in my early 20s, maybe 23 or 24, and I live there with one steady roommate and a couple of others who drift in and out over time. The steady roommate feels important somehow. I can still picture his face, even now, but I couldn't tell you his name or how I knew him. One of the temporary roommates leaves after some falling out with him, and there's another one I never trust from the start. Nothing dramatic at first, just that quiet feeling that says, don't turn your back on this person. My room is always the front bedroom. It's big, bigger than you'd expect, and for some reason, no one else wants it. I always do. I feel attached to it right away, almost protective of it. I remember having people over sometimes, friends stopping by, but nobody ever seems comfortable there. They never stay long. The atmosphere makes them restless. I even remember arguing once with a friend, trying to convince him to move in, and he absolutely refused. At the time, I took it personally. Looking back, even in the dream, I think he was reacting to something I didn't want to admit. From the outside, the place looks completely ordinary. That's part of what makes it unsettling. It's a modest, red brick house with a dark, shingled roof and this very noticeable white downspout along one side. No porch. Just a front door and a side door. There's a driveway, a detached garage we're never allowed to use, neatly trimmed shrubs, a flower bed, a tidy lawn. It sits in a neighborhood in a city where I really did live for a few years, which only makes everything blur together even more. When I wake up, I can remember touring the place, signing paperwork, carrying boxes in, carrying boxes out. I remember it the way I remember actual events. Except none of it happened. Inside, the layout never changes. There's this long central hallway connecting everything, bare and undecorated, almost echoing with emptiness. The whole place has that hollow, in-between feeling, like it exists slightly outside ordinary life. And the rooms are huge. That's one of the strangest parts. From the street, the house looks small, but inside it stretches impossibly far, like it goes back 2 or 3 lots and sideways farther than it should. Nobody in the dream finds that unusual. We talk about the neighbors as though we're attached to another unit, maybe a duplex, but it clearly isn't one. And we never see those neighbors. Never hear them either. The house itself is worn down in a way that becomes normal. The paint is chipped, the sinks are cracked, the linoleum is stained, the carpet looks tired and yellowed with age. The fridge smells sour no matter how often we scrub it. The hallway always has this damp, stale odor to it. The stovetop is crusted over with old, burnt food. There's even a fine layer of dust on the walls, if that makes sense. And somehow none of us ever think to hang anything up. No posters, no photos, nothing to make the place feel like home. And the odd part is, none of us seem especially bothered. We keep saying the rent is cheap enough that it's worth it, especially once it's split 3 or 4 ways. Every so often someone says, "We should really call the landlord about this." But no one ever does. I don't even remember seeing the landlord. I don't remember paying rent either, or knowing how much it was supposed to be. It's like all the practical parts of living there are missing. The part that stays with me most is the back bedroom, the one my steady roommate lives in. In his room, there's a staircase leading down to the basement. Not behind a door, just open, with a dusty curtain hanging at the bottom. The curtain is always closed. We've all somehow been told the basement isn't ours to use, that we're not supposed to go down there. Nobody questions it. Nobody jokes about it. Nobody pushes. But every time I even look toward those stairs, I feel uneasy. Deeply uneasy. I avoid that room whenever I can. I avoid the back part of the house altogether. Meanwhile, my roommate sleeps in that room like it's the most normal thing in the world. He never seems disturbed by it at all. Then, one day, something changes. We decide to go past the curtain. I never remember who brings it up. I never remember what finally makes us do it. And I can never remember what we saw down there. That part is always gone when I wake up, like someone tore those pages out. But I do remember the feeling. Whatever was in that basement made something inside me snap into place. Not curiosity, not confusion, just certainty. I needed to leave. And in the dream, I do leave. Within a few days, maybe a week, I'm moving out. But that last week feels blurred over, foggy in a way the rest of the memory doesn't. Everything before it is sharp. Everything after it is absent. I never hear from those people again. I never see the roommate again. They just vanish from my life completely. Which would make sense if none of them ever existed. But somehow that doesn't make the memory feel less real. That's the part I can't shake. It has been over a decade now, and this place still lives in me like an actual chapter of my life. I know it wasn't real, but my mind keeps filing it away as if it was. I had the dream again recently, and it left me sitting with that same old feeling, trying to figure out why this imagined place feels more fixed in my memory than some real apartments I actually lived in. I don't really know what to make of it. I just know it feels less like a dream, and more like I keep brushing against a life that almost belonged to me. So, this happened a few months ago, and even now I still catch myself thinking about it. My husband and I finally moved out of this house that, honestly, felt deeply wrong. We're safe now, and I'm not scared the way I was back then, but I still can't fully explain what was happening there, and that's what sticks with me. The house was in this old mining town where a lot of the downtown area was built over abandoned mine tunnels. People around here still talk about construction crews finding hidden caverns underground that were never on any map. So even before anything strange started happening, the place already had this unsettling history. It was over 100 years old, right in the middle of town, and it carried that kind of heavy, worn-out feeling some old houses have. We rented the basement suite in early 2019. I knew the landlord through work, and at first everything seemed mostly fine. Nothing dramatic, just a weird atmosphere I couldn't quite put into words. Then, in 2020, things started to shift. There was a shared laundry area in this unfinished section of the basement. At first, we didn't have access to it, but once the pandemic started, the landlord told us to use the washer and dryer there instead of going to a laundromat. On paper, it was a nice gesture. In reality, that room made my skin crawl. The second I started doing laundry down there, I felt watched. That's the only way I know how to describe it. The floor was bare concrete, and near the middle there was this raised, square section, maybe 2 feet by 2 feet, with a circular patch in the center made from a different shade of concrete. And sitting on top of it was this bundle of sticks tied together into a pentagram. Now, my landlord was a very spiritual person, so I knew it probably had some protective meaning for her. I tried to respect that. I really did. I told myself it was basically spiritual home security and left it at that. But after I noticed it, I couldn't ignore how oppressive that room felt. Not long after that, little things started happening. A cupboard door would swing open by itself. A trash can would tip over for no reason. We had this framed picture that kept falling, over and over, even though it was nailed into the wall properly. One night we had a friend over. I'll call him Noah. We were all sitting on the floor playing cards when he suddenly went pale. Right after that, the picture crashed down again. I barely reacted because by then it had become weirdly normal. But Noah swore he had seen it lift upward before it fell. I laughed it off in the moment, but it definitely got under my skin. For a while, it stayed at that level. Creepy, but manageable. Then, in 2021, the basement flooded. Not our actual suite, thankfully, just the laundry area. The landlord had her partner come by to fix a pipe, and to get to it, he had to open up this hidden area under the house. We hadn't even known it was there. There was a boarded-up door in the unfinished part of the basement, and behind it was a staircase that went way down and way back under the house. I never actually went down those stairs, but I stood at the top once, and I couldn't see where that space ended. It felt less like a basement and more like the beginning of a tunnel. After that door got opened, everything escalated. The noises got louder. Things started moving more often. The whole house felt tense, like we were intruding on something that did not want us there. Most of it seemed to center around my husband, especially when I wasn't home. He started having night terrors again, which he hadn't dealt with in years. Then one day he was standing across the living room from me, pulling his shirt over his head, and suddenly he jerked and laughed like I was messing with him. He said something like, "Okay, very funny, stop." I had no idea what he meant. He told me he thought I had just grabbed at his stomach, but I hadn't gone near him, and when he took his shirt off completely, there were fresh red scratches on his side. I know how that sounds. I know, but I saw them. Another time I went out of town overnight for work, and because he hates sleeping alone, he stayed up late redoing our fish tank to keep himself busy. When I got back, he told me my earrings had been falling off their rack all night. I had a lot of jewelry on that thing, dozens of pairs, and he said it kept happening one at a time until finally everything came crashing down at once, while the rack itself stayed hanging on the wall. Then he heard the shower turn on. He was too scared to check right away, so he just stood there listening until it shut off. When he finally looked, the shower was wet. That was one of the moments that really got to him. There was also this day when I was in the laundry room and came back into the living room to find him looking absolutely horrified. He told me I had just walked in from the basement a minute earlier, sat down on the couch, and ignored him when he tried to talk to me. But I hadn't. I had literally just walked in. And then something similar happened again not long after. I was cleaning in the kitchen for over half an hour, watching a whole episode of a show on my phone while I worked. When I came into the living room, he said my name, sharply, like he was frustrated. He insisted I had been standing there the whole time ignoring him. I got defensive because I knew I hadn't been there. Then I showed him the show I'd been watching, and we both just kind of froze. Because at the same time, we remembered the earlier incident, the one where he thought he'd seen me come in and sit down. After that, we made this unspoken agreement not to talk about any of it while we were inside the house. And looking back, I really think whatever was in that place fed on tension. During that stretch, my husband and I fought more than usual. At first, I blamed stress. I was in school. He was burned out at work. Life was a mess. But our landlord started changing too. She became colder, harsher, more obsessed with money. And our mutual friends noticed it as well. Around the same time, she and her boyfriend started fighting constantly upstairs until they eventually split up. It felt like the whole house was souring people. At one point, my husband asked a coworker for advice. His family had spiritual traditions, and he took our story seriously. He gave us a few suggestions, mentioned some crystals, and warned us not to engage directly with whatever was there. But the one thing he said very clearly was this: if the pentagram ever broke, we needed to leave. That same day, before my husband had even told me any of that, I went into the laundry room and noticed the pentagram was gone from its usual place. I assumed one of the landlord's cats had knocked it down, but when I found it under the stairs, it wasn't just knocked loose, it had completely come apart. Every tie had unraveled. The sticks were all scattered in a pile. I texted the landlord to let her know and left it there. When my husband got home and told me what his coworker had said, I just stared at him and then showed him what I'd found. After that, things got worse, but not always inside the house. It felt like the chaos spilled into our lives. I hit one of the worst depressive episodes I'd had in years. My husband quit his job because the environment had become unbearable, and then an older coworker became fixated on him and eventually tried to break into our house. That was it for us. At that point, whatever was going on spiritually almost stopped mattering, because now our safety was at risk in a very real, physical way. The strangest part was that once we decided to move, the focus seemed to shift. My husband's night terrors stopped almost completely, and mine started. Full body, screaming, kicking, terrified sleep. The atmosphere got so heavy that he barely wanted me in the house alone anymore. Once we got the keys to the new place, he handled most of the move himself because he didn't want me spending more time back there than I had to. And the difference after we left was immediate. I didn't realize how oppressive that house had been until we were out of it. The air in the new place felt lighter, cleaner, like my body could finally unclench. Later on, we talked to a few people who had visited us there, and every single one of them said some version of the same thing. That house felt off. So that's the story. Maybe there's a logical explanation for all of it. Maybe the old tunnels, the hidden space under the house, the tension, the fear, all of it just combined into something that got into our heads. I'm open to that, truly. But there are still moments I can't explain away. And even now, what stays with me most is not one single event. It's the feeling. That house felt like something underneath it was awake. I want to tell you about something that still sits strangely with me, even now. I can't honestly say, yes, without question, that was paranormal. But I also can't explain it away, and that's what makes it linger. A few years back, I was heading home with 4 friends, and we decided to cut through a small cemetery. It was around 11 at night, maybe a little after, but not especially late. The place itself wasn't creepy in the way people imagine cemeteries to be. It was tiny, wrapped around an old church on a hill overlooking the town. The gravestones were all weathered and old, and no one had been buried there in a very long time. There were houses nearby, a few small flats, and even a care home just down the road. I'd walked through that cemetery plenty of times before without giving it a second thought. So we were making our way around the circular path, and out of nowhere, I caught this bright blue flash in the corner of my eye. It shot from my left side across my vision and disappeared off to the right. It happened so fast that I turned my head instinctively, but there was nothing there. I remember thinking, well, that was odd. But I kept quiet at first because I assumed it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. Then, it happened again. This time it moved the other way, from right to left, just as quick and just as vivid. And when I say vivid, I mean it was impossible to ignore. It wasn't a faint flicker. It was this intense electric blue, almost like the flash of emergency lights in the distance. Small, yes, almost wispy, but incredibly bright. After that, it kept happening. Back and forth. Left to right to left. Always just ahead of me, always darting across the center of my vision, and then gone the second I tried to look directly at it. It was so consistent that I started wondering if one of my friends had a laser pointer and was messing with me. But none of them could see anything at all. Not one of them. And honestly, they weren't the kind of people to pull that sort of prank anyway. The longer it went on, the more unsettled I became. Not frightened exactly, not in a haunted, goosebumps kind of way. It didn't feel sinister. It felt confusing. Deeply, intensely confusing. But then my brain did what brains do when they can't make sense of something, and it jumped to the worst possible conclusion. I became convinced something might be wrong with my eye. I actually started thinking, what if this is a retinal tear or some kind of medical emergency? Looking back, maybe that sounds dramatic, but in that moment, it felt like the only explanation I had left. Eventually, I worked myself into a panic attack. My friends could see I was spiraling, and they got worried too, so we agreed we should leave and go get checked out. And here's the part I still can't explain. The second I stepped off the final stone steps and out of the cemetery, it stopped. Completely. No more blue flashes, no lingering streaks, no odd spots in my vision. Nothing. It was just over, as suddenly as it had started. What makes it even stranger is that it seemed to follow the path perfectly, almost as if it were staying just ahead of me the whole time. The path circles the church in a neat loop, with 2 entrances on opposite sides. We had come up one set of steps and were heading around toward the other side, and that blue light stayed with me the entire way, flickering from side to side like it was leading me forward. I've heard plenty of stories about shadows, figures, voices, cold spots, all of that. But blue light? I've never really heard anyone talk about that as a paranormal thing. So I'm left with the same questions I had that night. Was it something explainable that I still haven't managed to identify? Was I somehow hallucinating for no reason I understand? Or did something genuinely happen there, and for whatever reason, I was the only one who saw it? That's the part I can't shake. Not because I'm desperate to believe it was supernatural, but because I'm usually the one trying to rule things out. I'm naturally skeptical. I look for the ordinary answer first. But this one has never settled neatly into any box for me, and I still think about it more often than I'd like to admit. I want to tell you about something that happened to me years ago, back when I was living in a little mountain town in Colorado called Cripple Creek. At the time, I was working as a card dealer at one of the casinos up there. I had been living in Colorado Springs before that, but the drive was long and rough, especially once winter rolled in, so I figured it made more sense to move closer to work. I ended up renting this old miner's house just outside town. It had been standing there since the late 1800s, and it looked every bit its age. The floors sagged in places, every step made the wood complain, and the whole place always felt cold, no matter what I did. The basement was the worst part. It was unfinished, with dirt floors and crumbling walls, and somebody had carved this strange symbol into one of the stones. I never put much stock in things like that, though. I've always been a skeptic. What really got me at first was my cat, Jasper. The moment we moved in, he acted like he wanted no part of that house. For days, he barely left my bed. He stayed tucked under the blankets most of the time, and honestly, with how cold that place was, I didn't mind the company. I had the heat running constantly, a space heater in my room, even an electric blanket on the bed, and somehow it still never felt warm enough. After a few months, I decided to get a roommate to help with bills. A guy I worked with at the casino moved into the upstairs area. His name was Braden. Everything seemed normal, and life settled into a routine for a while. Then one morning, something happened that I still can't explain. I was working an early shift then, the kind where you're up long before the sun even thinks about rising. That morning I got up around 3, took a shower, got dressed, and was getting ready to leave for work. My bedroom was just off the living room, and as I stepped out in the dark, I saw what I thought was Braden walking up the stairs at the far end of the room. I remember it clearly. It was the shape of a man in a thick winter coat moving up the steps. I even heard that soft rustling sound those heavy jackets make when someone walks by. It felt completely ordinary for about 2 seconds, and then my brain caught up with me. Braden had started work at 3 that morning. There was no reason he should have been home. That's when the air in the room seemed to change. I stood there for a second trying to make sense of it, then grabbed my pistol and went upstairs. I checked every room, closets, corners, everything. There was nobody there. Nothing. The whole upstairs was empty. I didn't stick around after that. I put the gun back down, got out of the house as fast as I could, and headed straight to the casino. And there he was, Braden, exactly where he was supposed to be, working. I've gone over that moment in my head more times than I can count, and I still don't have an explanation for it. I don't believe in ghosts. I still don't. But I know what I saw that morning, and I know what I heard. Even now, just talking about it, I can still feel that chill all over again. I need to tell you about a night that completely changed the way I see things. At the time, I did not believe in ghosts or spirits at all. Not even a little. I was the kind of person who would laugh about paranormal stories, make jokes, and brush everything off like it was just nerves or imagination. That was me, right up until I stayed at this house with my friend. We were house sitting at her uncle's place, this beautiful home tucked into a heavily wooded area, quiet and a little isolated even though there were other homes nearby. My friend, I'll call her Finn, had told me before that her cousin always felt strange things in that house. She used to talk about weird energy, unexplained noises, and the feeling that someone was there when nobody was. I never took it seriously. I just assumed her cousin was overly anxious. Then came that night. When it was time to sleep, Finn and her boyfriend, who I'll call Silas, went to the bedroom, and I decided to sleep on the couch in the big, open-plan lounge. I actually preferred it. It felt relaxed, and I was still wide awake. A little later, our friend Amelia called us on FaceTime, and we all chatted for a while. I was alone in the lounge on the call, while Finn and Silas stayed connected from the bedroom. At some point, we started joking around and said Amelia would probably come haunt us since her own house supposedly had strange things happen there. I laughed. I remember being completely unfazed. And then, almost instantly, the whole atmosphere changed. The room went cold. Not normal nighttime cold, not a breeze, not a subtle shift. I mean suddenly, sharply cold. The kind of cold that makes your skin tighten. At the same time, I felt this horrible, draining sensation, like my energy was being pulled straight out of me. My body felt heavy, and there was this pressure on my chest, as if something was sitting there, pinning me down without actually touching me. That feeling lasted for a couple of minutes, and I was trying to make sense of it, trying to stay rational. But then I became aware of something else. I felt, so clearly, that something was in the lounge with me. It felt like it was standing in the corner near the fireplace, just watching me. I looked straight at that corner. There was nothing there. Nothing I could actually see. But the feeling did not go away. If anything, it got worse. The room felt freezing by then, and the pressure and dread just kept building. It is hard to explain unless you have felt it yourself, but it was like every part of me knew I was not alone. And what made it even stranger was that this happened in the middle of a scorching summer. I live in South Africa, and that day had been unbearably hot. There was no reason for that room to feel like ice. After about 10 minutes, I could not take it anymore. I ran down the passage to the bedroom where Finn and Silas were. I told them exactly what had happened, and I know I must have looked shaken because they immediately took me seriously. Silas and I even went outside afterward to check the garden and around the property, just in case someone had somehow gotten in or been lurking nearby. There was nothing, no sign of anyone at all. Then, about a year later, we stayed at the same house again, this time with another friend who was much more sensitive to paranormal stuff than I was. He was one of those people who picked up on things without even trying. Early that morning, around 5, he woke me up and asked me something that honestly sent a chill through me all over again. He asked, "Did you clap next to my head and say my name to wake me up?" I was half asleep and completely confused. I told him no, of course not. And the thing is, I am an incredibly deep sleeper. I do not just wake up, move around, clap in someone's ear, and then fall back asleep without knowing it. That is not possible for me. Our other friends were not in the room either. When he woke up, there was nobody there. We were both left staring at each other, trying to come up with some reasonable explanation, and neither of us could. That house was the first place that ever made me question everything I thought I knew. Before that, I would have rolled my eyes at stories like this. Now, I cannot. I still do not have a perfect explanation for what happened, but I know what I felt that night, and I know how real it was. Whatever was in that house, I do not think we imagined it. So, this happened around 5 years ago, and I still can't explain it in a way that makes complete sense. My girlfriend and I were out at this river trail near where we lived, just getting some exercise and enjoying the weather. She wanted to jog, and I decided I'd take my bike. The trail kind of splits around a main bridge in the middle, and that bridge is the big landmark. There are smaller crossings at either end, but the center one is where people usually stop, look out over the water, and hang around for a bit. We decided to go in different directions at first. My plan was to bike my side, turn around, then head toward her side so we could meet up and finish around the same time. Each half of the trail is maybe a couple miles or so it felt easy enough to time it out. Since I was on my bike, I was moving pretty fast. I got close to the far end of my side and thought about continuing toward the lake, but instead, I turned back. On my way back, I passed this older man, probably somewhere in his late 70s or early 80s. He had this really kind face, soft smile, and gave me a little wave. We did that quick trail greeting, just a simple, "Hey," as we passed. What stood out to me was that he seemed almost expectant, like he was already looking at me before I got there, waiting for that little hello. Nothing creepy, nothing strange exactly, just memorable. Anyway, I made it back to the middle bridge and rode across it so I could stop for a second and look over the river. And this is the part that matters. When I had passed that man earlier, he was walking away from the main bridge, farther down the trail. He wasn't moving quickly either, more like someone out for a peaceful stroll, taking in the scenery. After stopping at the bridge, I headed over to the other side of the trail, the side where I was eventually going to meet my girlfriend. When I got there, I decided to take a break. I got off my bike, sat there for a bit, and started scrolling on my phone. Probably about 10 minutes went by. Then I got this weird feeling and looked up. And there he was. That same older man was walking across the bridge toward me. I just remember staring because it made no sense. The man I had seen earlier had been a good distance down the opposite side, heading away from the bridge. Even if he had turned around right after passing me, there is no way he could have covered that distance, crossed back, and made it over to my side that fast. Not at the pace he was walking. And it wasn't just, maybe it looked like him. It felt exact. Same gray knit cap, same faded green puffer jacket, same jeans, same build, same slow, easy stride. He kept coming in my direction, and I started feeling awkward because we had already said hello once. I get socially anxious sometimes, so instead of looking at him again, I dropped my eyes back to my phone. When I last saw him, he was maybe 20 yards away. I only looked down for about a minute, maybe a little more. Then I looked back up. He was gone, just completely gone. And what made that so unsettling was the layout of the trail. From where I was standing, I could see a decent stretch in both directions. If he had kept walking, I should have seen him somewhere. If he had turned off, I should have noticed that too. But there was nobody there. No man on the path, no figure in the distance, nothing. I just sat there staring, trying to make it make sense. And honestly, I still can't. I know how it sounds. Maybe there's some explanation I missed. Maybe there were two men dressed almost exactly alike. But in the moment, it didn't feel like that. It felt like I saw the same person twice in two places he couldn't possibly have reached, and then watched him disappear. I want to tell you about a place I lived in when I was younger, because even now, at 24, I still have a hard time putting it into words without feeling like it sounds unreal. These days, I barely experience anything paranormal at all. Maybe the occasional strange feeling, but nothing like what it used to be. When I was a kid, though, it felt like the supernatural had its claws in my family. Honestly, it wasn't just me. Everyone in my immediate family seemed to go through things. It was almost like we carried something with us, like whatever darkness was already in a place would somehow grow stronger around us. Looking back, maybe that made a strange kind of sense. My childhood had a lot of pain in it, and sometimes it felt like that pain opened the door to things we couldn't explain. There was one apartment in particular, where I lived from about age 9 to 12, that I still think of as the worst place we ever stayed. I don't say that lightly. That apartment felt wrong in a way I've never felt anywhere else. It was like the air itself was angry. There was this constant heaviness, this sense of dread that never really lifted, like something in that place was always watching and always furious. And it wasn't just a feeling. All of us experienced things. We'd catch shadows moving across the walls when nothing should have been there. We saw figures out of the corners of our eyes. We'd wake up with scratches. The bunk bed my brother Eli and I shared would shake so hard it felt like someone was grabbing it and trying to rip it apart. Nighttime in that apartment was its own kind of nightmare. For me, the worst part was trying to sleep. I used to dread bedtime. My older siblings handled it better than I did, at least on the surface, but even they admitted the nights were terrible. I'd lie there scared out of my mind, waiting for exhaustion to finally pull me under. And when it did, that's when it would happen. I'd slip into this state that felt like sleep paralysis, except it was more than that. I'd realize I was trapped, and the second I became aware of it, panic would hit me. I'd try to move, even just a finger, anything at all, and it felt like I was dragging myself through wet cement. Sometimes breathing felt almost impossible, like something heavy was pressing the air out of me. Then the loop would start, and it wasn't like I'd see some obvious horror movie figure standing over me. It was worse in a way, because it was this presence, this pure, hateful force. I could feel it. It felt like it despised everything in that room. It hated me. It hated all of us. There was no mistaking that. I would fight with everything I had to get out of bed. Sometimes I'd manage to throw myself over the side, just flop straight onto the floor. It didn't matter whether I was sleeping on the bottom bunk or the top one. Somehow, in that strange, half-dream state, the same thing would happen anyway, like logic didn't apply anymore. I'd hit the floor, and for a second I'd think I'd finally broken free. Then suddenly, I'd be back in bed again, frozen. I can't really explain how terrifying that was. It took so much effort just to fall out of bed once. To have to do it over and over again felt endless. I'd land on the floor, barely able to move, every muscle locked up, and all I could do was stretch one arm toward the bedroom door beside the bed. I'd feel the carpet under my hand. I'd think, just get to the door, just get to the door. And then everything would snap back again, and I'd be right where I started. Sometimes that cycle felt like it lasted for hours. Every now and then, I'd make a little more progress. I'd drag myself across the floor inch by inch until I reached the doorknob. I remember grabbing it with one hand and trying to pull myself up while my legs just hung there useless, like they didn't belong to me. I'd try to call for help, try to mouth the word, but nothing would come out. Not even a whisper. It was like my voice had been taken too. And then morning would come. After what felt like an entire night of fighting just to move, I'd still have to get up and go to school like everything was normal. That was the part that made it feel even stranger. Life just kept going. Sometimes I'd wake up and realize I really had ended up on the floor. Sometimes I'd find faint scratches on my arms. Other times, there'd be nothing visible at all, just this bone-deep exhaustion that made it feel like I hadn't slept for a second. I still feel ridiculous talking about it. I really do. There's always that voice in the back of my mind saying, That sounds impossible. That sounds insane. But I know what I lived through. I know what that apartment felt like. And I know I wasn't the only one who experienced it. So when I tell this story, I'm not asking anyone to explain it away from me. I'm just telling you that it happened. It was real to me, and for a long time, it was just my life.